Sorry, Raphael.
He just said to record. I was like, I'm going to, yeah. All right. So first of all, we're going to talk about sound editing, the tools like EQ, compressors, reverb, things like that, and what they do. We're actually going to make an exercise out of this so that everybody can kind of experiment with sound and how it affects people's voices, or if you guys want to do a piece of music or whatever you want to put in. And we'll just like take the same clip and apply different things to it to make it sound different and see how it comes out in different ways with these different tools. So we're gonna explain them.
You guys want to make a chipmunk voice? This is your chance.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty easy. You just up the pitch.
If you guys want to make a chipmunk voice, this is your chance.
Right. All right. So the first thing I want to explain is just like frequencies. Just a refresher from last semester. We were talking about sound. So frequency, it's sometimes referred to as pitch. It's the number of times per second that a sound pressure wave repeats itself. And they look like this. The higher the frequency, I mean, the faster the wave, like the one on the bottom, the more times it's repeating each in the 1 second, then the higher the frequency. Our ears can hear around 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And so that's the range that you'll find most audio in. You won't really find it going over that because we won't even be able to hear it. So the frequency of speech lies somewhere between around, I'd say probably like 150 hertz to around like 8,000 to 9,000 hertz, just based on this graph here. I've heard different numbers thrown around, but like that's around the area that they always put it in. They say the male speech is down lower most of the time on the frequency range, and the female speech or the child speech is up higher. And when people are yelling or they're screaming or they're something like that, the pitch can, you know, change somewhere in that range. It goes higher with loud, with like little screams and stuff like that, because they just have a higher frequency than someone just talking like what I'm doing right now. Yeah. The range of the human perception, as you can see, goes from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And in the green bar, that's treble sounds. The blue bar is bass, and the orange is medium. So when you hear those words bass, medium, or treble, it just means where they fall in the frequency range. A lot of the times, to our ears, lower frequencies can sound quieter and higher frequencies can sound louder, but it just really depends on the actual sound itself, and it's not always the case.
Lower frequency tends to travel farther too.
Oh, good to know. And yet that's why you'll hear lower frequencies through like hums and stuff through rooms, because they can travel through things a lot easier then.
Yep.
Cool. So most dialogue, whenever we're just talking regularly, lies between about 180 to maybe 1,500 hertz, or well, maybe that's more like 3,000, 4,000 hertz. And that's what we want to be looking at mostly when we're talking about film, because we're focused more on dialogue. When you get into actual sound editing, when you're doing sound effects, when you're doing music, things like that, and if you're trying to mix it at all, then you'll be looking at the whole thing across the board. But the main focus point when you're talking about people's dialogue and things are going to be right in that middle of the frequency range. Well, not really in the middle, but on the middle of most bars, they show it like this because we focus more on this area. So the first thing we're talking about is what is called EQ, or equalization. And what equalization is, it's used to lower or raise the volume in specific frequencies. Filters are normally used with it to help take away certain unwanted noises like low frequencies, maybe like a room tone, or a high frequency pitch or buzz that you're hearing in your audio. They'll use like a low pass or a high pass filter, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's to take away those sounds so that only the voice or the audio, the dialogue is heard, and not those annoying unwanted sounds. So doing things like this, and especially when you're messing with equalization, you can improve people's voices, you can take out unwanted sounds, and you can do a lot of different things. But it is very manual, and you do have to like look through your sound and choose and pick what works, what doesn't. Different sound editing tools will have, different sound editing software will have different displays for it. This one shows these little circles right here that you can move up and down, and it's showing where they are in the frequency range. And if you want to bring it up or down, there's some that show a heat map, sort of like this, while you're also editing it. And it'll show where the sound is hitting. So frequency range would be from left to right. And then the decibel range, how loud it is top to bottom. I mean, bottom to top.
Yeah, that's right.
And so then you can choose where you want to, if you're hearing some kind of crackling noise or something like that, you might be able to see it in the heat map or in a visual aid of an equalization tool. Let me see if I can actually bring up a different one. Well, oh, that's why. I mean, we'll just use this as an example, but it's just like, it's kind of like that. It's a grid, and you just choose the point at where you want to pull it down and cut it, or where you want to boost it. And you can do a lot of different things with this and make people's voices sound less nasally. You can make them sound more deep, or you can take out some of the higher tones or the lower tones, lower frequencies, and make it sound more clean or more thin. It can sound more tinny. It just depends on what you want to do, but there's many different ways you can alter the ways that people sound or that instruments sound if you're messing with music. And so EQ is like one of the main tools you'll use if you're editing audio. On a DAW or a digital audio workstation, you're going to be able to listen to individual frequencies on most of them, where you can actually just isolate the frequency that you want to hear to see where you want to make your cut or where you want to take out some of the noise. And that can help you find those noises. Like if you're trying to take out room tone, you can isolate it and just hear the frequency of 380 hertz, and then 370 and 360, and keep going down until you find where that room tone is really at. And then you can just do a filter or something like that to take out that noise and see what it sounds like. No matter what you're doing when you're talking about editing audio, always just check it after you've done it, and only edit one thing at a time. Don't make 7 different edits and then listen to it, because then you're not going to know what worked, what didn't. And the more you do, the more like the more fake, the more artificial the more artificial it sounds. So you want to be sure, like, don't do it too much. You don't want to do it to a too large of an extent. Just like with anything, a little bit simpler is better, but this can really help to fix problems in your audio. Now, if you have a really crappy audio file that was recorded very badly and the audio is barely coming through, or the dialogue's barely heard or legible, and you're not going to be able to make it perfect, but you can make it a little bit better by boosting it and then adjusting some of the things in EQ. But it's never going to be as good as just getting a good recording from the start. So always try to get the best recording on set, so that you have more to work with in post. Unlike with visuals, audio is very, like, if you miss it, then it's not going to be there. Visuals, you have a little more leeway with like CGI and stuff like that. Audio, you'd have to re-record it. So it's really important to get someone that either knows what they're doing and can record it well on set, or to be able to do that yourself.
Mhm.
As you can see in this picture, the blue line, when they're cutting, you can either make it very narrow or you can make it a little bit wider. You also have the choice of that, and that will affect a little bit more of the frequencies around it. If you make it very narrow, it might just affect 600, the frequency 600, but if you make it wider, it might affect 600, a little bit of 550 and a little bit of 650 and have a little bit of runoff. So that's something else you can keep in mind and just check and see what you want to do.
Have you described what cutting is?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to. So cutting is when you're taking the sound and you're bringing it down, you're lowering it. You are making it less. You're not making it heard as like, what? How am I trying to say this? You are bringing
it's
the
like
volume
the
of that
upper limit,
individual
right?
frequency, and you're bringing it down. What was that?
It's like the upper limit, right? Like you're setting how high it's allowed to be, or is that something else?
Oh, that's something else. That is compressing. So cutting is actually when you're just taking the volume of whatever spot and you're bringing it down. So you're cutting that frequency. Boosting is when you're putting it up. So you're raising it. So if everything was on -5 decibels and you're boosting some of it up, the red line is boosted up to 0 and the blue line is being cut down to -30 or below. So like negative infinity, pretty much. Let's see. There are certain words you're going to hear for sound, and these are going to be a lot easier to understand if you, there was one video that actually showed showed examples of these, but if you want to look them up individually, listening to them is a lot easier than explaining them, but I'll go ahead and explain them anyway, since I have them. If you hear these words in audio, this is somewhat what they mean. Bright, you hear that it's bright. A bright sound has most of its energy in the high frequencies. It's a high-pitched sound.
If I'm not mistaken, it's like either the second or third video. There's the guy basically recorded all of those examples on the syllabus and showed how they would sound.
Right. And of course, just like with anything else, these aren't set in stone of like where on the spectrum they sit. It's just like if something sounds kind of bright, then people say it sounds more like it has most of its sound in the high frequencies. It's more high pitched.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain that because like we can't show their video because it's their video and it's kind of hard to explain sound. So if you guys want to have a better idea, it's second or third video on the syllabus on talking about that.
Okay, yeah, because this next one, dark, like I'm not even going to try to describe it because I thought it was the opposite of bright, but it's not technically really like that. So you'd have to like look it up. But if you want to look up dark audio or dark sound or what does dark sound mean, you'll be able to get a description or even better, hopefully a audible example so you can hear what it sounds like. Warm, when someone says something sounds warm, it's going to tilt toward the bass frequencies, with high frequencies quieter or subdued. So they say that's warmer. It has more of a bass. It has a little bit more of a oomph to it, I guess. They say something is dull, then that just means it's not very clear or loud. It sounds kind of like it's maybe coming from a wall. That could be dull. Nasally, that just sounds like somebody has a clogged nose. Sounds nasally. And you can affect all these things in the EQ and actually make people sound like these different things with anybody's voice. You just have to pick the right frequency and either boost it or cut it to get some of these effects going. Something can sound, but you don't want these effects usually. That's why you don't want to adjust too much at once. You don't want to have something sound like these unless that's what you're actually going for. Otherwise, you won't know which one of the 5 different adjustments you just made it sound nasally. And now you got to figure that out. And so just adjust one thing at a time, check it, adjust it back if it didn't work, and then adjust a new thing. That's another thing they said. If you're using EQ, you have all of this, you have total control over that sound file of like which frequencies get raised and boosted and which frequencies get cut, or if you leave it all alone. You don't want to edit something, see that it doesn't work, and then try to fix it by editing another part. you want to just put that thing back to the original and then edit the next thing to see if it works. Because if you edit one thing and then it's not working and you try to overcompensate on the other side of the frequency board to, you know, cut the rest of it down or boost it up to do the opposite effect, you're going to start running into these problems where it sounds very unnatural, artificial, and weird. Another word you might hear is boxy, which means there's too much low frequency and not enough excitement to cut through the mix. So it sounds like the person's boxed in a way. You might hear muddy, which is just like a lack of clarity and definition. And then you might hear shrill, which is a high pitched and very sharp. It's very like this. That's very shrill sounding. It's very annoying. But
It was
those are the
very,
different words you might hear, like when you're talking about audio. There's several more, but those are the ones that we came across when we were looking at these things. So I thought
How
I'd-
would you say, I was just about to say what Raphael typed just now. How would you say muddy is different from dull?
right?
So dull, they said, just sounded kind of like, that's the thing, like, right? Like they do sound like they could be similar, which is why it's very hard to describe in words exactly what they're
Yeah.
meaning. When you hear it,
Yeah,
and you
it's
can train
like
your ear to
describing a
it.
flavor.
Yeah, I mean, like muddy. is
Yeah,
like,
it's like describing like
Dude, when we
sweet.
watched it, when we watched the
You
video,
know?
I
the
can.
explanation of the video, I can tell you, like, when I heard it, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like, it's hard to describe, but it kind of makes sense when you hear it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Let me have a go. So dull would be like it colorless. So it would sound like almost monotone, or like it's dulled out, right? Versus like muddy will feel like there's like extra like noise kind of mixed in that makes it all like.
The video I sent in the playlist.
That's a
in
pretty good description of it, yeah.
Yeah, the WhatsApp.
Oh.
Yeah. So the WhatsApp I sent the first video today, it's called What is Equalization? EQ for Beginners. That is the one that has the examples. I sent it earlier this morning around 2:37 p.m. If anyone that's not in the WhatsApp would like me to email them, just text me and I'll email, or even that is. And sorry. But I texted it today at 2:37. And that's the one that has the examples. And like I said, there's like some really lame jokes in the beginning, and then he gets to the examples and he does a really good job at it. And
He
it's
does
just,
go through it pretty fast.
yeah, he does. And that's why Coda paused it and went back, and we had to like
Yeah.
listen a couple times.
Yeah. So I mean, these things you're gonna like once you start listening to them and you're training your ear to hear these things, you're gonna hear it a lot more often. But it is very hard to describe, especially when a lot of them are very similar seeming. And even when in like if you're asking different people, they might give you a different answer of what exactly that means. So it's good to know though, so that you know for yourself when it sounds like these things. And also if somebody else tells you, hey, that sounds kind of muddy, you'll kind of know what, you'll at least have a starting point of knowing what they mean. And then you might be able to know if you know that, you know, muddy is usually meaning lower frequencies and there's too much going on or something like that, then you'll be able to lower those frequencies to make it sound less muddy. You know,
I
that's
wonder if it would sound the same if you put it at like 0.5 speed, or if it would influence.
No, it would change the
It
pitch.
would change, right? Yeah. Because I was like,
Yeah.
would that I don't think so.
Right.
I would like to add is the graph that you're showing here, right? Basically, you have two audio signals there, right? One is two few dBs above the one at the bottom, right? So you would have maybe some components of the track which is sitting at 6 gigahertz, right, which is the frequency at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some of them. The other one is going to be 18 gigahertz, right? So both of them are pretty low in the as far as the gain goes, right? Gain is in dB. So your basically bringing the whole level of this signal at the bottom to a higher level, and you're boosting the components of the voice or whatever the sound is at 6 gigahertz and 18 gigahertz. So that could be, some low frequency components. Maybe there is a room where you have a bunch of things going on with a lot of people in there, right? So you're essentially bringing that up, and when you bring that up, what happens is you're obviously changing the attributes of that component, right? So that if you increase it too much, then you're changing the tone of that particular component. So it could be, and if you change it too much, right now I think it's going from -20 to -5. So that's about -15, right? Sometimes you have to be careful when you're actually changing it that much in equalization. So when you do change it that much, then that's when it would start to get really muddy or dumb or dull, right? Based on the overall the soundtrack itself, and also those particular components. I mean, in this case, you might have been bringing it up because it is dull. Those 6 and 18 gigahertz signals are very dull, so he wants to boost it up a little bit. But when he's boosting it up, he's actually making the whole track itself, impacting the whole track. And that could be not something that you want. So you have to be a little careful as to how much you gain, how much gain that you put on, when you're trying to equalize.
Well, and isn't that why there's 2 lines? Because it's like he's like the red part is getting boosted, but then the blue part is then getting cut in order so that not everything is getting affected.
Right. So my thinking in this is that the blue line is the original signal, right? And you're basically equalizing it with red signal. So what happens is you're bringing in that 6 gigahertz, and you boosting it up. And same thing with 18 gigahertz, you're boosting it up. And that's why you get that upward, exactly opposite to what the lower signal is. If that's
Okay,
what
so the red is the effect that you're adding to it.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Right. That's because when you recorded it, the 16, the 6 and the 18 were too, it had too much minus 30 dB, right? That's how much it was recorded in. But the normal was around 20 dB. So maybe there was a conversation going on, which was set, the levels were set at 20 dB. But when somebody spoke, it basically, shot up to minus 30 and minus, at 6. And that part of the signal was 6 gigahertz. And then the other one was at 18 gigahertz, which can affect it. So when you brought it in, this is the frequency response you got, where you're seeing that 6 gigahertz and 18 gigahertz is way too much out of the spectrum. So you want to bring it in. So the only way they can do it is they increase the level, and then they slightly change the components of 6 and 18. So that's why you get that curve. Right.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's a matter of fine tuning and adjustments. You may have the whole track, and then you may have some noise, background noise. And let's say maybe there is a squeaking noise in the middle, and you want to cut that off. So you go individually and then bring in that part of the clip and adjust that particular frequency to make it less noticeable. Like, the squeak is not going to be like a squeak. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and that's why you always want to do little adjustments at a time and just like check it before you continue moving on, just thinking that you got it. Even if you listen to it by itself, just listen to it again with at least part of the rest of it to make sure it all flows pretty well and it works with the rest of it before moving on. Also, if you guys remember when we were learning about sound, the decibels are on an exponential scale, which means when you go up 1 decibel, it might only be, I don't know the exact math, but I'm just saying it might be, 1 time louder than you had it. If you go up 2, now it might be 3 to 4 times louder. And then you just keep going up, it's going to be even more. It's not like 1 times, 2 times, 3 times louder. It goes up exponentially, so it increases. It could be 139 times as loud when you go up 3 decibels. It's just, I don't know the exact math, look it up, but that is what happens when you're doing gain and when you're talking about decibels. So you want to check that and make sure that you're not making, like Vish was talking about, you don't want to do too crazy of adjustments at once, because usually small adjustments in gain or cutting will do the effect you want. You don't have to pull it all the way down or bring it all the way up to make it do the effect you want. Usually less is going to be making it sound better and making it sound more natural and doing exactly what you were wanting it to in the first place.
Right, because what happens is dB is basically a ratio of output to the input power, right? So what you give, if you do the gain, if you increase the gain twice, then you're basically changing the input twice as much to the output, which may be like too much, right? So maybe you want to go very less, so it's in fractions, what the changes that you get. That's what I think like what I was mentioning, that go gradually and then quickly.
Yeah. All right. So in EQ, you have different filters. We'll talk about those in just a second. The main ones, actually, I think that's the next thing we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to say these real quick, then I'll show you guys what I mean. EQ, you have high and low pass filters that can lower the low or high frequencies only. You have a shelf that raises or lowers frequencies before it or after it, if it's a high shelf or a low shelf. Then you have either peak or bell curve, which adjusts the selected frequencies with either side getting adjusted as it curves with it. One tip that the guy gave is using a wider option when boosting and a narrower option when cutting. So just like in this picture, when they're cutting, when they're bringing it down, you can see the lines are very narrow because they only want to affect that specific frequency range. But whenever they are boosting it, when they're raising it up, they do it at a wider, they do it wider so that it affects a little bit more around it, so it doesn't sound like one frequency peaking. When you take something out, it's less noticeable than when you're adding something in. And so whenever you do it at a wider range, it's going to make it sound more natural than if you're doing little tiny narrow peaks. It might depend on what you're trying to do, but that's just the general rule of thumb is when you're cutting, keep it narrow. When you're boosting, keep it wide. What was I doing? All right. So when we have a low pass filter like the top left, it's a curve that progressively lowers the sound of all the high frequencies beyond that chosen point. So on this image right here, the part where right underneath low pass, the actual word, right when it starts to curve, that's probably the point they chose to say we want the low pass to be right here. And that way they're cutting off all of the high frequencies beyond that point at a curve. So it doesn't happen exactly right down at like straight down from where you select it. It just gets gradually less loud as you go down the line of the frequencies. So if you started it at like 2000 hertz, then it, there might be a tiny bit of noise coming from 3,000 and 4,000 hertz, but it's going to be progressively less loud the further you go. And then after that point where it reaches the bottom, none of the other frequencies are going to make any noise at all. So if that bottom point is, let's say 4,000 hertz, then everything after 4,000 hertz is going to, not have any effect on the sound. It's also known as a high cut filter because it cuts off the high frequencies. It's known as a low pass because it's letting the low frequencies pass through. And so that's just a way to remember it. When used at an extreme level, it can also make the sound like the audio is coming through a wall. So it can also be used to take away unwanted high frequencies like pitches or buzzes like we talked about before, to a lesser extent. If you're just cutting off the very high frequencies where maybe some buzzing was occurring that's making a very high, very annoying noise, and it has a very high frequency, you might be able to just use a low pass filter and get that noise out of there without affecting the rest of your audio. Because when we're talking, that's another reason to remember that when we're talking, the frequencies are like from 8,000 hertz down to about 180 hertz. So anything after that, you're not really going to hear much of a person's voice. And anything below that, you're not really going to hear people's voices. So that's why these high pass and low pass filters work without affecting the audio too drastically. It's because they're just taking out those very high frequency sounds or those very low frequency sounds. So yeah, if you're using it if you get into an audio editing thing, you have some noise, if you use a low pass filter and you bring it, you drag it along your waveform, you'll be able to see that the lower you go, the more it starts to sound like it's behind a wall. And it sounds like it's behind a wall like that. And so it's used a lot to, if you have somebody who's supposed to be hearing something from another room, or there's loud music coming from the hotel next door, then they'll just have a regular sound, a regular audio file that has like the clear version. And then they'll just use a low pass filter on it to bring that sound down and make it sound more muffled and more like it's coming from another area. The high pass filter is the opposite. It's a curve that progressively lowers the sound of all the frequencies before a chosen point. So it's cutting the low frequencies. It's also known as a low cut filter. And you'll do that to either get rid of room tone or get rid of some rumbling that you didn't want. Things like that. I'm not sure exactly what it does the more extreme you go with it, but that's something I'm going to do in this exercise that we have coming up when I'm messing around with all this stuff. Then you have a band pass filter, which is the thing in the middle. It's the curve that progressively lowers the sound on both sides of a chosen point. So wherever you choose it, the one on the left, the side on the left, excuse me, one second. Excuse me. All right. The sound on the left, the sound on the right, the frequencies, the lower frequencies and the higher frequencies are going to get cut off from that point. So you're only going to have the middle sound. A common use for this can be made to make like a telephone effect for a voice, because a voice isn't as rich and isn't as full whenever we are speaking through devices like that. Probably in this Zoom meeting, my voice isn't as full as it would be if you were talking to me in person. And so to mimic those effects, especially with older technology in movies, you use like a band pass filter and just make it more or less narrow, depending on how much of those high and low frequencies you're trying to cut out. And you're keeping that middle, so you're keeping most of the voice, but you're just cutting off some of that texture that is in the voice. Then you have notch filters, which we saw earlier in the example. It's the same thing. It's just a little area just like that, that you are, that you are choosing to take out the frequency, and you can choose how wide or how narrow those are and which frequency you're trying to take out. Notch filters are just, one little frequency here or there, and you just choose how wide or how narrow it is to cut out those frequencies. You can use multiple ones at once and cut out different frequencies. It doesn't just have to be one. And you can also use all of these frequencies, all of these filters at once, but that's going to start causing a bunch of weird effects to happen, because the more you use, the more artificial it gets. Notch filters are also called band cuts. So if you ever hear that term, it just means the same thing on the notch filter. But that's why this heat map is very good, especially when you're trying to do the notch filters. You can see where noises are spiking. Maybe you have somebody that sounds isn't sounding the way you want them to, and you can see where most of their voice is going on the frequency and what part of the frequency is getting raised up the most. And then you can maybe do a notch filter or one of those other filters to try to cut it down a bit and see how it sounds from there. Sometimes it's easier to see it, like to visually see the waveform and on like a heat map or just the waveform itself, than just listening, because just listening is going to be very difficult to figure out where exactly you need to make the adjustments. Then you have what's called a high or a low shelf. And that's just, this isn't used as much, but you take a point, and from that point back with a low shelf, or from that point forward with a high shelf, it raises it or lowers it for all of the frequencies beyond that point. So if you were trying to boost all of the low frequencies, you might use a low shelf, click a part where it's like maybe 150 hertz and raise it up so that everything below 150 hertz gets raised up, but the rest of these frequencies stay the same. So these things, they can be used, but not as much, just because you kind of want to have more control than raising everything up like that would. Sometimes you don't want, you want the lowest part of someone's voice up, but you don't want all of the additional low frequency noise to come up, because then some more like room tone or people breathing into the mic will be heard a lot easier if you're boosting up all the low frequencies like that. Yeah, what's called the bell curve. And that's just like this. If you're boosting something up or if you're lowering it, it affects the, it's kind of like it's basically a notch filter. It's just a bit more wide, looks more like a bell, and it affects not just the frequency you're grabbing and pulling up, but a little bit of the frequency around that area. In this picture alone, he's grabbing around, 800 hertz, and it's affecting up until around like 1,700 and maybe like 450 or something like that. So those might only get raised up a tiny bit, but as it gets closer to the point you're affecting, those other frequencies are getting raised up as well. So using a notch filter and a little bit more narrow if you don't want to bring up all of these different things, or if you don't want to bring anything down, you don't want it to be as wide, but it just depends on what you're doing and what it's affecting. And you have what's called a comb filter, which I'm not sure how often this is used. I mean, it's probably used a lot more in music than it is in anything that I would do, like with dialogue and sound effects and things, but I'm not exactly sure. Comb filters are just a bunch of notch filters lined up to a certain point where you can affect how much they, if they're exactly the same like this picture, or if the one all the way to the right is going to be, only brought down by 10 decibels, but the other one is brought down by 30. You can adjust all these things, but it's kind of just like a rhythm of different notch filters. And they have feed forward notch filters, which bring down the sounds that you're grabbing. So all these frequencies where the blue lines are, all of that frequency is brought down, but the rest of it will be up. So it'll still, the rest of it remains the same note sound level, but where you're selecting it at gets brought down. And then you have feed forward, which is the opposite. Only the parts of the comb that you're grabbing are going to have the noise, and the rest of it will be brought down and lowered. So there's only going to be like very small sections that have any sound. So it's going to be like boop, 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 instead of this, which might have just little drops in noise instead. Yeah, like I said, I'm not sure how often those are used specifically. Before we move on to compression, there was a few things that somebody was doing in Premiere Pro. Premiere Pro isn't, it's not used as a sound editing tool, but it does have the ability to edit different sound effects and different things like that. Do different adjustments to sound. Most of the editing tools that you use will have some basic audio adjustment capabilities. You might have EQ and things like that. It might just not be as intuitive as if you get a sound editing software specifically for that. Oh, middle sound's just, bass is the lowest frequencies, middle sounds in the middle of that, which is usually like where our human voice and stuff like that is. And then you have the treble, which is the higher sound frequencies. Higher frequencies, not exactly higher sound, but yeah, so middle is just in between bass and treble. But yeah, so she was editing this in Premiere Pro and just showing a few different things you might do if you're just editing like a video on YouTube, or if you're editing a short film and you're doing all the editing yourself. You want to think about things like audio swells, and that's where it builds up, like the noise builds up until it makes a louder noise. So I was like, shh. And basically the way you do that, or the way she did it anyway, is she just took like a crash cymbal, like the instrument where you reverse it, and then it builds up to that loud crash instead of going the other way around. And that's all she did. She did a few other little adjustments, but audio swells like that are pretty easy to do. You just reverse it, or you can get a single tone that's making a constant noise, and you just bring the first part of it down to the lowest, and you bring the other part up so that it gradually starts to rise until it makes the loudest noise it can. And then you can move on to your scene. She used it as like an example to show somebody getting ready to wake up from a nightmare. And those are used a lot in film and narrative work. So I'm sure you've seen it a lot where that happens, and audio is very, it can help lead into the next thing very well. So those are some things you want to think about. She also did what's called a ring out, which is like a quickly fading out of an audio clip with some reverb. Sounds like the ending of a memory sequence, and it's used to quickly fade out music or people's dialogue and just leave it as it lasts for a little bit longer, but quickly fades away so that you can move on to the next thing. And then there's pitch shifter, which is, one of the easiest tools to use. You just put it in the audio and you can change the pitch, making it higher, which will sound more like a chipmunk, or making it lower, which will make it sound more like a demon, or what people say demons sound like. And so like pitch shifting, you can just use that tool, and that's in Premiere Pro and a lot of other editing softwares.
I'm sorry, who was the she you were talking about?
Oh, the woman who did the editing on Premiere Pro.
Yeah, he does that a lot.
But
I thought I explained it.
did the editing in what context? Sorry, like
she was
I
showing
just
the
didn't quite
video
get the
where she was
context.
editing she was showing the different audio effects that she was using.
Yeah, so he'll do a thing where he's
So it's one
referring
of the
to
videos.
Yeah, you do that a lot.
Oh, did I not explain that? I thought I did.
No, you didn't.
I mean, he said that there. He said there is a woman who edits in Premiere Pro, I think is
yeah.
what I remember him saying.
So basically, it
Right.
was like, there's one segment of the playlist where it's like multiple parts, and it's this woman talking about basically sound engineering basics, and she goes through those things, and that's, I believe, what he's referring to, right?
No, it was someone else. But yeah, it's just
But yeah, you don't
whenever
have
I'm
to
talking
use,
about
you
the
know,
meetings, if I ever talk about like he or she or something, it's just somebody in one of the videos in the syllabus.
Right. I
what I'm
mean, like, and
referring to.
Priscilla's right. Like, it's probably not a good idea, to use another person's video by like embedding the video within our class, but you can still cite it, give the title of the video and the name of the creator.
Yeah,
True.
that was actually something I was gonna suggest to him. Like, maybe we put like the name of the video or the letter of the video, because every video on the playlist was separated by letter, by topic and by letter. So we might make a note of like when we're taking notes and stuff to have like the letter of the video nearby, and that way we can say like, okay, this note we're referring to video letter this from topic this. Would that be more helpful, you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I just
Here's
think,
the
yeah,
video.
in general, citing things is good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
The
agree.
distortion. So let's
Definitely.
just type in 24.
So six must-know creative audio effects in Adobe Premiere Pro by Premiere Gal.
Sweet.
What a name.
But yeah, so she was showing like the different audio effects she was doing. And so like pitch shifting was one of the easiest ones because you just put it in there and then you raise the pitch or you lower the pitch and make it sound different. She also showed how you can get whooshes for transitions or make it sound like something's underwater. And you can adjust whooshes to go quicker, slower, higher or lower pitch, and more to just adjust to it however you need it or however you want it to sound and to match it to your project. And using low pass filters, again, you can make it sound more like it's muffled and like it's coming from underwater.
Or like it's coming for you. I'm kidding. Really bad
And when
joke.
we're talking about audio effects, a lot of the terms, you'll hear these terms wet, which means it has a lot of effects or it has effects, and dry, which means there are no effects. So if you hear that it's dry audio, that means it's the original source file that was just recorded. And if you hear that it sounds wet or that it sounds very wet, then it just means that there are effects clearly in it or that it sounds like there are a lot of effects in it. So those are just, words if you hear it.
Raphael's just being, gosh, what's the term I'm looking for? Smart? Sure. Let's go with that.
Yeah, I don't really think that she would have a copyright on hers, especially since it was just a second of doing it.
Yeah, we're not like,
I don't think it's not about legitimate copyright. It's just about like, like the idea of taking someone else's work and taking views away from them potentially.
no, yeah, we're not
Oh yeah,
showing
no,
the
definitely.
entire video. We're not showing the entire video. We still recommend you guys watch it all the time. We're just saying, like, for those of you that didn't have time or whatever, like she mentioned this and we thought it was really interesting. If you want to and have time, you can go and check it out, obviously.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's like a better. It's like that's the better option. Is that it means that you're directly pointing to them. They're gonna get more views. So
Yeah, no, I
think-
agree. I usually don't do it because you guys all have the syllabus, so it's like if you want to look at it, just go in this. But I agree because if some people don't.
I mean,
go
it's
in
just
the
that if you
syllabus,
are specifically
it's just-
referencing something, yeah, that's just what I mean.
At a
Yeah, I think
point-
there was just context that
agree.
was kind of missing there.
Yeah,
What?
she's gonna.
What'd you say, Raphael?
I think it was just about the context. Like we weren't sure what you were talking about, but then like the video makes it kind of more clear.
Right.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, no, I agree, Mel. I'll start pointing to like the where it came from, where the information came from. Like I said, I usually wouldn't because it's already in the syllabus, but you're right because some people aren't even going in the syllabus and they're just watching the videos. So it's good to point to where we're getting our information and all that. Anyway.
Also, so that they can go like be curious and be like, okay, it's this video, because sometimes it can be a lot and they're like, which video is he talking about?
Well, and
Yeah.
also like you're posting these to YouTube, so not everyone who's potentially watching these videos is going to be in the class and have the syllabus.
Right.
I still
I
feel
agree.
weird calling it a class, but yeah.
All right, so the next effect we're talking about is compressors. A compressor compresses the loudness at a point that you determine. It's not like turning down the volume, because that's going to affect every part of the audio. It is telling the audio file where at in like decibel range, like how loud it gets. You want it to start making it quieter. So anything that goes over that point starts to get compressed. So if you have somebody that is talking and maybe you're doing some kind of voiceover or you're doing something like that, and they all of a sudden like they cough or they scream because they saw a bug, or they got louder just because, then you can put on a compressor and make sure it turns down the volume of just the part that goes above a certain level, so that everything else stays the same. Nothing else gets affected except for that one loud noise that goes above the range that you want it to hit. It's a good way to kind of keep the volume at a pretty leveled, so that there's not, when you have dynamic range in audio, it means from the audio file, that from the loudest part of the file to the quietest part. And usually you don't really want too much dynamic range in audio unless you're specifically going for it. So usually you want it a bit more leveled, so that everything, when people are listening, they're not having to turn down their volume and then turn it back up and then turn it down, because there's different levels of loudness coming at them.
And because people like me will never want to watch another video of yours again, just because of that. It really worries you, because it's like, oh, are all their videos like that? And then, or their content?
Yeah, I mean, because then you're not sure like how loud it is. And some people have their videos louder already, but like within the same.
Or I just know not to wear earbuds, pretty much. Like, okay, these people's videos maybe don't. Or these
So
people.
you guys can see this picture here. Let me see.
Wait a minute. What? Okay, I was gonna.
So if you're putting the threshold like in the middle right there where it says threshold, and it has the little dotted line going up to that spot, if that's where you're putting the threshold and you are telling it to compress it at anything that goes louder than that, then if you just had a straight line, one straight audio signal that was making the same noise going straight up, it would start to curve down after the threshold, but the rest of it that you didn't tell it to compress would stay the same. So anything before this point doesn't get affected, doesn't get adjusted, but anything after that point in the frequencies is going to get, not frequencies, in the loudness, it's going to get quieter. You have the ratios over here to the right. 2:1 means every 2 decibels that go over that threshold, it's only going to allow 1 decibel to be heard. So that would be called something like soft compression. It's not compressing it too much. It's still allowing, there's still sound coming through. It's just not going to be as loud. It's going to cut it in half. But then you have 4:1, or you have something like 10:1, or even 20:1, where every 20 decibels that go through, only 1 is going to be heard. And it's going to make it a lot quieter after it hits that threshold. When you're editing with a compressor, there's a tack, there's a toggle, or whatever you want to call it, where you can adjust what's called a tack. And it determines how fast the compressor starts the compression when the threshold is met. So if there's a sound that goes over the threshold limit, you can determine if you want the compressor to start after 0.03 seconds, or if you want it to wait a whole second. And if the sound is still over the threshold, then to start compressing it. And you can decide that. So then if it's only like a one-time occurrence that's very small and not really noticeable, you might just not care to, have it attack that and like bring it down right away, because that might start to sound a little weird. But if it's a prolonged sound that stays over that threshold, you might tell the compressor to kick in after a certain amount of time so that it brings that noise down. And then there's the other toggle that's release, which determines the exact opposite. It just determines how long until the compressor stops after the threshold has been met. So if a sound goes over the threshold, does the compressor stay on for 5 seconds, making sure that anything going over that sound goes down or stays down? Or is it going to hear the sound, attack it right away and compress it down, and then immediately release it and not have any compression again? And you mess with those because if something keeps going over the threshold and it's just like small little, a few seconds here, a few seconds there, or even like 1 second over the threshold, and then after 5 seconds, another second over the threshold, you can have these tools so that you can decide and make sure that it's taking down the sounds without making it sound weird or artificial. And so again, you'd have to adjust it, and then you'd have to go back and re-listen to it to make sure that it's doing what you want at the points that you're trying to bring down. Does that make sense? Maybe you ever hear a limiter? Limiter is basically a compressor. It's just a very drastic version of it. So like limiting is down 10-to-1 compression. So if you're ever using a limiter, then you are actually bringing down the sound by quite a bit from that threshold. So that is why you have 2 different tools for it. You might not want to bring it down to an extreme level. You might want to compress it down just a little bit. And so, that's what the 2 different tools are for, but they do pretty much the same thing, just at a more drastic level. Next, you have reverb. Go ahead and. So reverb is a lot of reflection, a lot of that sound reflecting off of surfaces or, just different surfaces and coming back at people in different ways and different paths. So if you look at the picture, the speakers in the front, when she's talking, there's sound going backwards, hitting against the wall, going up to the ceiling, and then going back over to the people. There's also lines going all the way across the room, hitting the back wall and hitting them in the back of the head. There's also the direct sound path coming straight from her mouth, going to where they sit. So in a larger room, like it makes it sound, there's a lot more reflections going on, so there's a lot more reverb. Reverb, when you're editing, it just makes it's about like, it makes the audio sound like it's in a bigger or smaller room, pretty much. So it can make it sound like it's in an auditorium where there's a lot of reflection going on, and you hear it, and it has it's like an extension on the person that's speaking. Like if I'm speaking right now, like it's not delay. That was a delay, but I think you know what I mean. Does everyone know what I mean?
Like an echo?
Well, it's kind of like echoing, yeah.
It's not echo exactly. That's delay. But reverb is more like adding reverb. So then it sounds like there's a bit more to my voice.
Like when you're in an auditorium.
That's how I kind of imagine it. It's kind of like layering. That's kind of how I imagine it in my head. Like layering the voice, like the same word on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. So you kind of hear bits of it before the. Does that make sense? I don't know. I don't even know if I'm.
It's hard to explain.
It makes sense. It's just hard to articulate.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So if you're standing in a huge room like an auditorium and yell hello, the very first sound you're going to hear reflected off the walls is an echo, which is the sound, the word, you're hearing it again. Hello, hello, that's echo or delay when you're talking about editing. When you're talking about reverb, it's more like it just makes it sound a little fuller. It makes it sound like there's a little bit of an extension to every word that they say.
Does that make sense to anyone but me?
What?
I don't know. I just thought I
get
don't know. It just occurred to me that it's kind of like a ripple, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Reverb is like a ripple where you're hearing that sound over and over again very quickly.
Did that make sense to
Here you
anyone?
go, visually. So if you are having that source signal, the person speaking at red, at green, those are going to be the echoes where you hear it again and again and again. But then reverb starts to hit in where you're just hearing that word very quickly. It keeps coming at you. And it's just like an extension of the word. It prolongs it like a ripple. But as ripple, just like a ripple, it starts out big and then it gets smaller and smaller as the ripples continue if there's nothing that's causing it to keep going. Does that make sense?
I would like
I
to
think
add,
so.
Like when you throw a rock into a pond and it skips and you see like little bits of the wave go into another wave. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's all that.
Good
It's all
vision.
that bouncing.
Yeah, that's why
Right.
No,
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly. I think-
bounce. I mean, it's reflecting off of the
But I
walls.
have bounces.
Because of how fast sound moves, if it's reflecting off the back of the wall and the front of the wall,
right.
I'm going to hear it at the same time. To me, it's going to sound a little bit like an echo, but like I'm not going to hear the word again. I'm just going to hear the very end of it with a little
So-
bit more of that sound.
I mean, I never said
What-
that bouncing meant echo.
No,
I
so
know,
what
that's
happens
still the
is,
same.
what happens is when you are,
Ay,
let's say
ay.
if you're shouting, right? Let's say if you're shouting. So you are at one end of the tunnel and the source is at the other end of the tunnel. So there is a delay between the source and what you hear, right? So that's a delay. But what happens is when it is reflected off the wall, right? Then it is coming in a two-dimensional space, like three-dimensional space. One is coming straight to you, another is coming from the left wall, another is coming from the right wall. So you get a echo of the same thing. So like if you're in a forest and you're shouting, right? It echoes back to you, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes that echo is reflected back and forth between different objects, right? So you'll have a second or a third or a fourth surface will be reflected and you'll get a reverb of the same sound. So the echo becomes like a reverb with multi-surface reflections. So reverb is more, you can add a reverb to somebody's voice to make it sound a little bit graver. We could say that because it's not echoing from one particular direction, but it's coming from all different directions. So it makes it a little bit more bolder.
A little bit more
so
full.
subtle. Yeah, more full. Like you may have somebody speaking, but you may add a reverb to that as if it's being reflected from the two sides of the wall and the front of the wall. So it's like a more fuller, right? But if it's an echo, it's going to be a single point of echo. So you say something, it reflects back to you. You hear the voice back coming back at you. But reverb is like it's more fuller reflection coming from all different directions.
It's more dispersed.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can say that. Yeah.
Yeah, and once we do the audio exercise, whoever takes part in that, you'll be able to hear it while you're messing with it, like what the differences are in these two things. But delay, reverb is the same as, well, reverb is like delay in that it reflects the sound again. The way it works in a digital audio workstation is it just takes that clip and it extends it a bit. Where it copies it pretty much, and then it just reflects it and plays it at the exact same time. And so when you're doing delay, it's reflecting that sound back after a a longer period of time. And we're using reverb, it's reflecting the sound back right away. So then it just sounds like it's coming at the same time. It's not sounding like there's a delay there. It's just a tiny,
Yeah,
split
it's an
second of a delay.
extremely minuscule delay.
Right. All right, and then when you're using delay, it's, it's like saying, hey, 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 hey. It keeps getting quieter as it goes. You can affect how many times it's going to reflect. You can do it to where it reflects only once in your audio, or you can do it to where it's reflecting for 20 seconds, but it just keeps getting quieter and quieter as it goes. And that's the difference between delay. Delay, you'll be able to hear the word again after it's spoken. Reverb, you'll hear the word kind of extended a little bit, but you won't hear it again. Does that make sense? The other thing delay can be used for is there's usually like an option where you can actually have the delay go from left to right. So if you wanted it, for whatever reason, you wanted it to go from the left speaker to the right speaker, and you start saying, hey, and then
You
you
want to
can make
reference
it.
the video and just be like this. Watch this, people.
I don't know which video it was from, and they didn't do
That
this
video,
in it.
that example I remember specifically. It was from that lady that was talking about basics and stuff, audio production basics, because she actually gave an example of reverb in the song.
All right, let me see if I can find it.
Are you saying it's the one that you referenced previously?
No, it's the one that
No,
I.
it's different. All of these videos are what we're talking about tonight, guys. That's why.
It's a lot. It's a lot, like a lot.
I mean, even just saying that you are referencing something in the syllabus is good
Yeah,
too.
but then people are gonna be like, "Where is?"
No, I
that?"
agree. I don't remember which one it is, and I don't see like
Okay,
the part 1, part
There's
2.
like
So I don't
4
really
or
wanna...
5 parts of that video. There's like part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that we have in the syllabus.
Oh, I think it's this one. All right, sound basics with Stella.
There you go, that one. It's one of those parts.
I think it's the reverb and delay. Sound
There
basics with
Oh,
Stella,
yeah, there it
episode
is.
4. There it is.
it is.
So that one explains it.
Yeah, explain
While we're
everything.
doing our editing exercise, you can also hear it for yourself, but that's just for an idea of it. Like we're saying, like explaining sound is very hard. Last semester was very hard to explain sound. So it's a lot easier when you're hearing what it sounds like compared to just hearing, the words of how it sounds.
Oui.
But yeah, when you're messing with delay, you can also affect how long it takes for the delay to happen. So it can be, 3 seconds apart. It can be 0.5 seconds apart, so that it's happening very quickly. It just depends on what you're trying to do and where you want it to sound like it's coming from. Then you have distortion, which is purposefully clipping the audio. It's like bringing it up all the way past 0 decibels to purposely clip it and make it sound distorted. I mean, that's all that really is. It's used, I don't really know how much it's used in films and stuff like that, but it's used sometimes in music. You'll see a lot of electronic music use it, and dubstep kind of stuff is all distortion. So
Yeah, but thankfully no one listens to that anymore.
I'm sure some people do.
Rude.
Just joking. Music is subjective.
All right, then you have what's called
I
panning.
haven't in a while.
Then you have what's called panning, and panning lets you distribute the sound across the stereo. Like if you're having stereo, you know that you have a right speaker and a left speaker, and panning in your audio is going to let you tell the computer where the sound is coming from. Is it coming more from the right? Is it coming from the left? Or do you want to space it out a little bit more than that? And it allows you to grab the sound and just bring it over, more towards the left, more towards the right. It also allows you to do something like this, where if you have a sound file and most of the sound is either coming from all of the right, the left, and the center, you can take different parts of it and move it around so that it sounds like it's coming, some of it from the center, some of it in between, and sounds more like it's coming all over the room instead of just, 3 of the sounds from the right, 3 of the sounds from the center, 3 of the sounds from the left. So panning allows you to adjust where it's coming from. It can also allow you to make the audio go from one side to the other if you have, but it's just mainly used for stereo. I don't really know. We're not really talking about surround sound here. That's a different process, I'm pretty sure. Panning is just for stereo outputs where it's left and right. But like if you have a car that drives across screen from left to right, you might want to have the sound of it go from the left speaker to the right speaker whenever it leaves the screen. That way it is more dynamic. You're adding a little bit more of spatial awareness in your audio. And so those things are something to keep in mind. I've seen some movies where they have the person there, we're watching the people talk from the side. And so one person's on the left, one person's on the right. And whenever one person speaks, it's either going to come from the right or left speaker, depending on who is talking. So you can do this a lot to make the audio kind of follow what's on screen and hear things from the side, or hear things from the left that's coming from the left of the screen, or hear things from the right that's coming from the right of screen, so that it feels a little more dynamic and a little more like you are in that moment. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to do this with all your audio. It just adds a little bit of depth to it. Let's see. Next we have chorus. Open this. Chorus effect. It's adding a copied version of the audio that has a slight delay so that it sounds like there's multiple voices and multiple people speaking or singing, or multiple instruments doing it at once. You can add a little bit of warmth and depth to the vocals if you don't add too much of a delay. It's kind of like reverb. You can do somewhat of the same effect. It's just going to come out a little differently. But this one allows you to make it sound like there's multiple people instead of sounding like it's one person speaking with a fuller voice. You can like see. So you have whatever the input is, it goes in, and then you have the chorus effect that brings it in, has a slight delay, and it adjusts the, it actually adjusted a little bit so that the tone has a little bit of a shift, because when you're having an actual chorus, like I don't know, a church chorus or something, they're not all singing the exact same note at the same time. There's a slight delay and there's a slight pitch difference in every single person who's singing or speaking if you have something like that happening. So what chorus does is pretty much that. It tries to mimic an actual chorus by delaying it and pitch shifting it just a little bit, so that, and then adding a little bit of gain so that it goes back and it sounds like the people are almost singing at the same time, but in a group instead of just one person.
I was going to say, from the examples I've seen, it can be a little hit or miss, just from the examples I've seen.
Yeah.
Just because sometimes it sounds very unnatural and weird. I don't know if the person just wasn't doing it right, or if, I don't know. Because I know that sometimes it can sound really cool depending on the voice and how you use it. And sometimes it just sounds weird. So
yeah,
keep that in mind.
It's just a picture of EQ showing like that you can, I'm not sure what was used for this exact layout, but if you were going to change some audio file with an equalizer, you might get something like this, or you might get the little bar that has the circles you can click on the actual waveform itself, where you adjust if it's lower or higher in the mids, the treble, or the bass. frequencies. So it's just like a visual representation of that. They say bass. When you're adjusting bass, you're adjusting the frequencies between around 20 to 160 hertz. So all of the lower frequencies below 160 hertz can be counted as bass. This isn't exact. You know, some people will say it's a little bit higher, or, you know, different people will say different things, but generally that's around the area. And then you have treble. When adjusting treble, you are adjusting the frequencies from around 6,000 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So treble actually takes up the largest part of the, you know, if you're looking at the frequency range, then treble would take up the largest part. Mid would be the second largest, and bass would be the smallest. Then you also have things in like in Premiere Pro, I know has this. I'm pretty sure the other editing softwares have these as well. There's more automated versions of EQ so that you don't have to manually do it if you don't want to, which will try to eliminate some of these problems for you. There's something called a De-Esser, which is exactly like it sounds. It's trying to eliminate hard S noises. Don't overdo it, or it's going to sound like you have a lisp, like that. It's going to make your S's sound more like TH if you do it to too high of an extent. So just be careful if you're using a de-esser to eliminate some of the S in your voice or someone else's voice. Then they have a de-hummer, which tries to eliminate hums on the lower frequencies. It's kind of like room tone in a way. It's trying to eliminate something like that. Maybe I think a fridge falls along the lower frequency range. So it might be trying to kick out something like that. And it makes a few notch filters here and there that tries to figure out where that sound might be. So those are more of like the automated ways of doing it. Most people recommend, if you know what you're doing, to do EQ and then to add a de-esser, or to start with a de-esser and then adjust it with EQ so that you have a little bit more control. But if you don't want to do all the manual stuff, then those are some options to quickly try to fix a few problems that might come up in your audio. Anyone have any questions, comments, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, all this is cool, but just know when you're doing your sound editing, that, I mean, there's a lot to go over, but me personally, I just say let a professional handle it. But if you must, just know that when you edit, especially if you're editing on headphones, that there's different types. There's headphones that are designated for audio editing, and there's ones that aren't, and those are more commercial, or for, you know, just for purposes of, you know, listening to music and stuff. I think it's called there's sweet and unsweet headphones, and in the sweet, they put all these limiters and stuff in there to make the audio sound, whatever audio is coming through it, sound as clean as possible, which you would think that would be a good thing, which it is, because you want your audio to be as clean as possible. But when you're editing, you want to hear, you want raw sound. So when you have headphones that are sweet, it's going to take away a lot of those sounds. You're not going to hear a lot of those sounds in the edit, like, you know, the low frequencies and the hums and stuff. You're not going to hear that on a sweet set of headphones. So you'll miss it and you'll ignore it. But then when you play it on other devices, like a cell phone, it might be there. So just keep in mind, like if you're editing sound, keep in mind what kind of headphones you're editing with, because every device you play it on is going to be different. I know cell phones don't have the best speakers, so there's a lot of frequencies the cell phones don't put out when you're listening to your media.
Mm.
So me, I edit my sound. I have a theater speakers, so like a Yamaha theater speaker. So like I'll do a lot of my sound editing on those. But when I edit on my computer, like when I don't use the speakers, I noticed that I was like, oh, like there'll be sounds on there. I'll never, like when I'm editing on my computer without the speakers, I'll notice, oh man, like I won't pay any attention to it. But then when I played on the theater speakers, I was like, oh, I never picked up on that sound or anything like that. So just keep in mind, like different devices produce different frequencies and stuff like that. So it's always best to, when you're done, listen to it on a device that's more designated towards sound, so that you can hear all the things that you missed in the edit if you're not using studio production headphones or whatnot.
So I
Yeah,
do
we
have a question to that regard. How do you find the information on what headphones like do what to sound? Like, say like, oh, I've got this pair of headphones here. I'm gonna look up how sound is affected by these headphones.
A lot of it is listed. The more professional ones, they'll list it on the packaging. I know when you order off Amazon or whatever site you go, I know Amazon, they'll put that information on there. But like if you're buying from
Nice.
Walmart, I'm not necessarily sure about the packaging and stuff like that. But like I
Yeah.
know, like I edit like my headphones. I use the Sony bass, and I got these. These are like, you get these from Target. Sony the bass boost. Those are pretty good too. But I think the not the Bose, but the
Oh, I
the
love
Bose.
what's wrong with the Bose?
Huh? Those are
I like
sweet.
the Bose.
They're not for editing. They
They're
make
not-
the sounds different.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They're not for editing.
What? I
Yeah.
know people who edit on Bose,
They're not supposed to.
but it is more for music. Yeah, I have heard that like
Yeah, like
It's-
when you have a listening headset, they are, they might boost up the bass, or they
Yeah.
might mess with the treble or do something like that to
Yeah.
make it sound better from the headphones themselves. So that's why,
Yeah.
like Ryan's saying, that's why you don't want to use those, because you want to hear all that stuff when you're editing it, so you can eliminate those problems. Otherwise, people that don't have, those headphones that are boosting the bass or have a different device, they're going to hear all the stuff that was the problems that you weren't hearing because you were wearing those headphones that were doing extra effects to make it
we
sound
did
good.
actually at some point we did go into detail on like different kinds of headsets and stuff like that and what they were for. And I believe that there was one of the websites that talked about like good headsets to edit in and that kind of thing. And I believe that he mentioned that it was something about how like most headsets for music will focus a lot on, will be very bass heavy, or will not give you as much control as editing headsets or something like that. But it has
Yeah.
been a while.
Like I have I know, like if you, like Mel, if you particularly if you're looking for headphones to edit with, your best bet is to go with like some of these companies like Sennheiser, because that's their thing, sound and sound editing. So like, I'm not saying all their headphones are meant for sound editing, but a lot of them like are that's what they're for, and they're not really expensive either. Sony has their own production headphones and stuff like that.
Sony is like the big one that they really recommend for beginners because it's not too expensive. It's like mid.
It's called neutral audio whenever you want the headphones that don't have any effects in them. You want
Nice. Yeah, because that does get frustrating.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it sounds okay now, and then go to something else. Oh no.
Right.
Yeah.
You want headphones that are neutral, and you also want open back, tend to sound a bit more natural because they allow the sound to go in and out. So I don't know. There's some people that use closed back that just like isolate the sound, but the closed back doesn't sound as natural to our ears, and most people don't have those. So you want to kind of listen on both, but mainly like they say to edit more on a open back, just because it sounds a little bit more natural, so it'll sound a bit more how everyone's going to hear it when they're watching it.
Yeah. There is also, if I remember correctly, there were actually a lot of videos of people talking about like the best in the playlist even they were talking about like the best headsets for editing and stuff like that, what to look for. So I'm sure that a quick Google search would help, but like Coda said, like there are, as long as you know what to look for, like those names that he mentioned, I feel like that would already help a ton. It's like, okay, I want neutral sounding headphones, because there are a lot, which I hate, but a lot of headphones for like music listeners will be very bass heavy and it drives me nuts. And that's like my one pet peeve when it comes to headphones. And that's why if you ever see like people who are editing and they have like something like the beats, they're not editing with those beats. They're just being paid to promote, because those are like super bass heavy and they're horrible. And everyone says that you should never edit on those.
Yeah. I was on a shoot one time where I wasn't the sound guy, and the sound guy, they had like beats and stuff,
Oh,
and I had to stop. I was like, dude, you don't hear that? He was like, what? Because he had noise cancellation, so he wasn't getting like a lot of the sounds like he was supposed to be hearing. He didn't hear those, even though it was like the microphone is there. The headphones are still sweetening up the sound a lot.
Right.
So,
that's super interesting, because they say that's like an amateur move, is like getting a bass heavy headset just because it's like famous or whatever. And he gave an example of the Bose. It's like, that's amateur, dude. Like people just want to show off because it's expensive, but those are not good for editing.
Well, it
Yeah,
wasn't
can I-
editing. He was talking about location recording, but yeah.
Yeah, but even then, like recording, editing, he was talking about that.
I
It
know.
was like, that's just people wanting to show off.
I was
So it
just
is kind of fun.
clarifying.
Hey, I have a
Yeah.
follow-up question.
Yeah.
So like in editing, is it common for people to like get sound cards for their computers, or?
I'm not really sure. Brian or Bish, you guys know the answer to that?
Those separate sound systems that you attach to your computer?
No, so like you can get a graphics card to improve your graphics, but for more like technical stuff on computers, like some people there is a device thing for that, and it's a sound card which handles like work that's just for that purpose.
Sure, yeah. I think there is depends on what you're planning to do. If you're trying to get multiple inputs into your computer, uh, which may not be available through a normal regular sound card, right? So they have specialized sound cards which would have those adapters. I don't recall what those connectors are. Sometimes they have like a fiber optics connectors. Which directly connect to the recording device, or maybe like a mixer, which connects directly to the computer, so you can capture them. Then so stuff like that, and so depending on your application, you may have a professional sound card which sits in one of the slots of the PC, and also when you have certain software that you're using for editing, they would recommend to use a specific sound card, which would make it easier for the software to run rather than using the PC-based sound card, which is basically customized with Windows software, right? But audio editing tool may require direct access to the bus, and the card, which your devices are connected to. So there are a whole bunch of cards that fall into that category. But depending on what your needs are, you can essentially pick up what you want and use the connector that you want to input the sound source. And also think as far as the headphones go, one thing you need to, usually professional is a kind of tag that they put to these headphones, which are a little bit expensive than your regular headphones. And one of the things that you need to maybe look at is, the tonal balance and also the frequency range, right? Some of the headphones may not have, they may be, the frequency range may be smaller, right? Maybe like 15 hertz to 25 kilohertz or something like that. And some may be more like 5 or 2 hertz to 25 kilohertz. So that basically lets you listen to the sounds that you may not really that would be cut off from a regular headphones. But then again, sometimes different people have different perceptions to sound. Some people may be able to hear it. I know somebody that I worked with, and she had absolutely kind of ear for minutest sound that was coming from the track. And I couldn't really figure that out, but she was like, right on, like, oh, what did I hear that, So yeah. It's all based on, what kind of perception you have for sound. Some people are able to listen to sound or maybe catch the sound tones or frequency very easily. Like, dogs who have a sense of deeper sense of sound because they're able to listen to certain frequencies which we can. That's why they are, and animals are also like that. Bats have certain sense of perception as far as sound goes. So it depends, so if you are taking, let's say if you're taking a professional headphones and which is having a range of 5 hertz to 25 kilohertz, it's not, there is no guarantee that you'll be able to listen to everything that's coming out 5 hertz, right? But at least, from a sound perspective, you would have that available to you. So I would probably look at, that range, one of the characteristics. And I'll think, Lookwood also mentioned the natural and open, the mid-range. So essentially, you're looking at mid-range, trebles and tonal balance, and what kind of how the bass of the sound comes through. So different things that you can look at. I know I personally use like a Sony professional headphones, which are a little bit expensive than the other ones, but Sennheiser also, I think, is up there. I've seen a lot of people using Sennheiser in the on the set.
Yeah, but I also have heard one video specifically, they were talking about like, if you're just starting with editing, but you want a good pair of editing headphones, Sony's are a really good place to start because you can find mid-range, I think like even like somewhere between 50 to 80 bucks. And you can get like a decent pair. Obviously it won't last you forever and you should upgrade eventually, but they're a great place to start and they have pretty much a lot of what you'll need.
Yeah, they just said that the Sony ones tend to, or at least the lower end ones, they tend to increase the bass. So as long as you know that it does that, you'll be able to still recognize what you need to do for the most part on location recording is what. Yeah,
but I think my recommendation would be like if you're trying to, if you're going to be an editor or a sound editor or a boom guy, or a sound mixer, I would probably invest in a very good headphones to start with, because you're going to be using it time and again for a long time. And, something which is more comfortable, and has better professional quality to it, rather than buying something and then
practicing, if that's where you're at,
Yes. Right.
All right. But, well, does anyone else have anything to comment or add before we move on?
This is an expensive industry.
No, it is. Like, it's very expensive, and there's a bunch of gear, but like that's why you try to, meet people, because some people might have their own stuff that they'll, bring on your set and things like that. But yeah, it can get very expensive if you're just starting out and you're looking at everything.
but
which is
also
why we're
like
talking about gear and
know,
everything this semester.
and knowing like where you're at and what you're working. Like for example, like I said, if someone's just practicing, maybe those would be okay. But like Vish said, if you are actually trying to make that your career, that would be an investment that's probably crucial for your work. And so that's something you really can't escape. And so it's just one of those things, like it'll hurt your pocket now, but it's an investment, you know.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of investments.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if this is something that you want to do all yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's why it's a collaborative effort, and why you try to get funding if you're able to, or try to find or rent equipment instead of trying to buy every single thing. But you know, there's different ways people go about doing it. But yeah, like not anyone's going to be able to do every single thing, which is why you want to have people that know what they're doing. Like Brian said, he usually just gets someone who knows what they're doing for editing sound. I just like knowing a little bit of everything, just so I know how to communicate with everybody, and so I kind of know what they're doing.
And also,
and I can tell like if they know what they're doing. That's another thing. Like I might not know exactly what I'm doing, but if I know more than them, then I don't want to hire that person to work on it if they don't know as much or more than me, hopefully, in the thing that I'm not focused on.
And also I would say, just because it's absolutely scary, the amount like that video that Mel shared on the WhatsApp with like with editing and stuff, it's not just with editing. Like it's scary to see how many people in this industry barely know, like when we were watching, even when we're watching YouTube videos, people who are professionals and work in this, they barely know their part, and they just go through life like, oh yeah, the other person, they just do this, you know, not knowing everything that goes into it. And some people say, oh, it's not necessary, but at the end of the day, if you're working in this industry and if you want to grow and you want to collaborate, and I just feel like knowing a little bit is important. And if that's choice, you know, but
in general, people sorry
you're good.
In general, people tend to prioritize specialty, you know.
Yeah, but I
like
also think
if you're not going to be an expert at it, why are you learning about this?
Yeah, but I also think that it makes you appreciate your craft more and not be such a douche, if I'm being because the amount of people that like, yeah, they know about their area and that's great, but they treat other people in the field as lesser than, and it is so frustrating and annoying and makes me mad. And like, you don't have to be a specialist, you don't have to know everything, but just knowing, you know, it's a little more important than you think, or just knowing a little bit about it so you can be more of an empathetic human, or more of a less douchey human, less arrogant maybe. It's very humbling when you learn that the field that you work in is just one small part of a bigger collaborative process, you know, and it makes you value your work more. It makes you want to learn more and grow opportunities for yourself. And it just makes you a better person to hang out with, honestly. Just my opinion.
All right. Well, anyway, we got to move on. We're taking way too long.
Rant a little bit.
Yeah. So the sound editing tool exercise is going to be whoever's, you know, participating in it, you're going to record audio or a short video clip, and then go into whatever editing program you have access to, or you can download. There are some free versions of these DAW, digital audio workstations, or, you know, your regular picture editing software has some sound editing tools. Whatever you have, or whatever you would like to get, download and use. We're going to take that clip or that audio file, and we're going to play it over and over again, messing with different effects to see what the audio changes sound like. The tools that we just discussed, you can take one and see what it sounds like when the pitch is low and when the pitch is high, and whenever you do a low pass filter and how far you extend it and how it changes the way it sounds. And then make the clip kind of quick so that it's very easy to see how quickly it changes. You don't want too long of audio because then it's going to have to replay over and over again. It's going to be way too long for the entire process. But maybe just like one word or, 3 simple words that you're saying in sequence, or just a noise or whatever, just like something like that. You can get creative with it. And then just adjust. And it's not about getting the audio perfect. You can try that if you would like to, but it's just about seeing what these different audio effects do so that you have an understanding of it. And then once you have all the tools done, you can try to make the best version by combining all of the tools for the final clip or the final version of the clip, or audio file, whatever you want to do. That is the exercise. I'll be sending out more information on that. Yes, in an email, I'll be sending out more, and I'll describe it a little more. I was just giving a little.
You're just giving a brief heads up, yeah, because we know that sometimes people are like, "Oh, I forgot," and now we're having to do it. So it's just good to remember that we're doing this soon, type of thing.
All right.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Sarah. Have a
Bye,
great
bye.
night.
The next thing we're talking about is cuts, and some of these things we've already talked about with the transitions because they kind of go hand in hand for some things. But with the cuts, we are starting out with L cut and J cut. And let me see if I can.
Which we already covered somewhat
We
previously.
already sort of covered, yeah. It's pretty ugly. It's because it's
already
kind of
11.
blurry.
I'm just like, are we going to do everything today?
And well, you guys keep talking. I'm just kidding. An L cut is a clip where the audio runs into the next clip. So if you have some,
what more are we going over?
we have cuts, film grants, and fellowships.
Okay.
Oh.
Trying to finish up, maybe like an hour.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go to my training. I'll watch it in the morning, the last hour, and I'll just come in. I think, well, what time are we at? So I'll skip the video.
We're at 11:03 right
We're
now.
about 2 hours in.
We're about 2 hours in.
2 hours in. Okay, sounds good. I'll watch in the morning. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
So an L cut is whenever you have 2 video clips and 2 audio clips, but the audio from the first clip continues going after you cut to the next clip. It can help to transition or lead into the next clip. It's used a lot whenever we're seeing somebody's face and they're thinking about a memory, or they're having an imaginative scene play out in their head, and we can kind of sense that by the audio starting while we're still looking at their face before cutting to the clip. It also is just used to generally transition from one scene to the next, or to overlap visuals with something somebody's saying. Like they might be talking about how life is at the moment or why they're fighting in the war, and then they're showing clips of different things happening while they're speaking. Or there might be somebody singing, like they might be singing a song. And I know in Lord of the Rings, he sings to the guy in his castle or whatever you want to call it. And they show the clips of the people all getting killed outside while he's singing. There's plenty of reasons you might want to have audio play from a previous
He's
clip.
referring to the Hobbit singing to the king.
No, that was Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the scene he's referring to, where he's singing. Was it Pippin?
it was. Yeah, I think it was.
It's the only
yeah, I think
time
it was
one of them
Pippin. It was,
sings in the whole thing. So yeah.
No, he was like the guy.
No.
The guy in the play.
They had drinking songs.
It doesn't matter what the actual clip is. It's just an example of.
I know. I just Mel likes accuracy, and so do I. So here you go.
Well, anyway, there's plenty of reasons why you want
she was
audio
just
to continue
trying to make it
playing while
easier to look
showing
up.
a separate.
Yeah,
thing happen.
I was trying to make it easier for people to look it up if they wanted to see the example.
Gotcha.
See,
Yeah, the
Mel
song
did.
is called "Edge of Night."
Thank
There
you.
you
Mel.
go. Anyway, there's plenty of reasons why you might want audio to keep running while you're playing different video clips, and those are just some of the reasons. There's others. But it just depends on what you're going for. And, it transitions into the next scene, or you just want to show something else because maybe something they're doing right then is boring. They're just reading a letter. Well, then you're going to have that audio flow into the next scene where you might be showing what's happening or the previous scene or who was writing the letter, so that you have a little bit more interest of what's going on. Of course, you can't just pull that out of thin air. You have to have the footage for it to be able to do it, but that would just be a reason to use an L cut. A lot of the times L cut, and the opposite of it is J cut, which is where the audio runs from the clip before into the next clip. So the audio starts before the scene starts happening. And I actually want to correct myself because I meant a J cut when I was talking about the memory or the dream sequence or the imaginative scene, because we'd be hearing the audio before we see the footage of that scene happen. So it helps us to get into that guy's head when we're just looking at their face, and the audio starts for the next scene, which could be a memory of him and his wife on the beach. And so we start hearing the waves of the ocean and her voice before we cut to it. That's a J cut. So that was my bad. An L cut is the audio continuing into the next clip, which would be like talking while they're showing visuals of things happening, like the Lord of the Rings reference. That would be an L cut. J cut is where you hear the audio before you see what's happening.
But whatever.
What?
Said the reference that you sucked at explaining and I had to help, but whatever. Sorry, you continue. I just had to.
So L cuts and J cuts are usually used in conjunction, especially when you're having a conversation between two people. That way it's not just cut to one person while they talk, cut to the next person while they talk, and cut back and forth. You have part of the person talking while the other person's reacting, or vice versa. You have the person talking before we cut away from the person who just finished speaking. So that's used a lot in conversation to keep it a little bit more dynamic and to stay on people's reactions and see what they are doing in the moments of people speaking. And it's used a lot just to keep it a little fresh. If you wanted to, using just like an L cut, cutting to character B and they talk, and then using, using a hard cut, cutting to character B, and then they speak. And then using another hard cut, cutting to character A, they speak.
I was gonna ask, is every L cut and every J cut like super quick, or can there be like slow ones as well?
It just depends on what you want. Like if you want the audio to keep going for a long time, or if you want the audio to start way beforehand. I mean, it's up to whoever's editing it to decide how far in advance to have it start or end.
Yeah.
And sometimes like if a character's monologuing, then you can do a few cuts back and forth.
Yeah. And then it'll be like continuously having an L cut pretty much, but then it'll keep going back to the original
change
take.
to the name, or is it still an L cut and a J cut, even if it is like multiple? Or
it'd be multiple L cuts, because then you're cutting back to the action. So it's not really an L cut anymore, because the audio is playing with the video at that point.
And that's what you would write if you were like making a shot list or something like that.
No, this is just for editing. Like this is the editor's decision. Normally you're not going to see any of this type of stuff in the screenplay or even in production. You're not really going to have exactly these names. The editor
will have like a list of, I mean, I could be wrong on this. Doesn't the editor have like a list of the cuts that they would like to do, or the transitions and stuff? So that it
depends on how active and involved the director would like to be, but not all the time. A lot of times editors can just be, a lot of times it could be the editor's choice on how they want to handle it.
Yeah, but I mean, for them, like, wouldn't it be helpful for them to have like, okay, now I'm gonna have in this scene, I'm gonna have this cut and write it down, and then have like a list.
They're not gonna know before they get to it. So what do you mean?
While they're working on it.
Well,
Is
that's
that
when you just kind of test it out and see, or I
Yeah,
mean,
you
if
have
they
to
can,
see how it flows.
yeah,
Okay.
like they can't, if they can pre-plan like that, then sure, but it would just be up to the editor again. It would be up
No,
to,
I just thought like while you're editing, would it be helpful or not to like make a list of the different transitions and cuts and edits and stuff throughout to keep track of like what you did and stuff, or would that be like too much overthinking it on my part?
I mean, you're going to be able to see it on the timeline, what you did. So I
Yeah.
don't, you'll be able to see the video clips and the audio clips and see how they overlap. So I don't know really what you're at, what you
That's true. That's true. I just feel like, yeah, my neurotic brain would just be like, would I be able to see every little thing? And I'd probably want to write it down, but that's more because of my disability than anything. I just feel like, just in case I didn't see that. Or
Because I think
missed-
it's more like you would write things down if you wanted to communicate it to someone else.
yeah, that makes sense. I was
Yeah,
just,
because I mean, if you're looking at it and you need to keep track of all of the different things that you've done to the edit, that's going to take forever.
yeah, you're probably right.
Quadruple the time that it's going to take, even more so probably,
Yeah.
of how long it's going to take to edit.
Never done it, like video editing and stuff. So I was actually curious, like how, if that's a thing or not. Because I know that while shooting, that's a thing, but while editing, you're kind of doing it as you go along. So I would imagine it'd be more complicated.
I mean, L cuts and J cuts, if they weren't originally intended, like somebody having a monologue that they show different scenes playing out, that might be in the screenplay where it says like,
Or the
you know,
storyboard.
yeah, right. But
Mhm.
like if you just have random B-roll and things like that, that's where the editor can use different things to, or they can just start the next scene. It wasn't really originally intended to have the audio flow into it. They just decided to start it that way because they felt like it was a good choice to make with what was happening in the story.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to like go off topic.
No,
I was,
I think
Okay.
you're right. So what happens is like different editors have different styles editing, and they would actually looking at the editor's edit, you can pretty much it goes actually to the type of editing that they do. Like Thelma was a shoemaker. She was doing most of Martin Scorsese's edits, film edits. If you look at her style, it's very distinctive. It's like you can literally see some cuts being used, which are more like a signature cuts that she would use. But yeah, that's a good starting point. I mean, you can pretty much have list of what cuts you want to get. So at least you have
what you're thinking of.
Yes, yeah. Because I think when you're getting the footage, editor is basically left by himself or herself, right? And she has the script, and then she has the storyboard. Storyboard is more of a tool that the director uses, or the cinematographer uses for shooting. But when it comes to the cuts, the cut is based more on the footage, which has a lot of coverage, right? So that coverage is basically put in, in one big pile, and they go scene by scene, and he cuts it out. So when he's cutting it, depending on the emotional aspects of that scene, the editor will basically say, okay, I want to cut it this way. He would have maybe like 4 different ways he's going to cut it, right? In some, he may use just the L cut, and some he would just do transitions, and some he would use just plain, fast cuts, and depending on the rhythm of the story that he's trying to tell, he would cut it in that manner, and he'll probably show it to the director and tell him, okay, I want you to take a look at all these 3 different done differently. What they say is like editing is the 3rd time you do the storytelling, right? So
Yeah.
yes, I mean, if you have a good idea of what cuts are there, and you basically have an that's how I think. I don't know if it is closely linked with editor decision list, because that comes after the footage is being edited, I think. But that's something which has a big impact, on how the things are cut, and having a good knowledge of what cuts to use, what cuts are available for you. Is
Yeah, because they do have their
definitely
signature as well, right? Different.
right
uh,
in the toolkit, right? That's part of your toolkit, basically.
Yeah.
Having which edits to get through.
But I was just curious because I know that like while shooting you have it, and like I know that editors sometimes they have an idea of what the project is, and so they might, or the tone or
Right.
something, and so they might have an idea of, oh, I think these kinds of transitions would be nice to set this tone. Let me see if I can make it work in what scenes or something like that. So that's what I was thinking, but I'm not very good at articulating what I was thinking. But I think
I
I got.
mean, like anything else, right? I mean, director has his own directing toolkit, right? He has got, okay, I'm going to be using this. Like that editor will have his own stuff that he would be, falling back on, saying that, okay, what can I use here? What can I use there? And that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
definitely having, I mean, if you're starting off, I mean, most of the experienced editors, they have already gone through, a lot of movies, right? So they basically know exactly how to cut this thing. They probably won't have the list, but they have it in the back of their mind. Okay, want to cut it this way, let's go with it, rather than intuitively, right?
Right.
I'm also a
And a
very
lot of editors have their own style to it too. So they have like their own specific way they like to do it. Like some people might hate to use J cuts because they just don't like the way they feel in the movie. And so they might avoid them just because they don't like them. And only add them in if the director requests it or the producer says they have to or whatever. But that's why it's important to always like speak with the people you're trying to hire. If you're the one hiring like the editor and things like that, and you're trying to you want to make sure they understand your story and what you're going for, because they are going to be the ones who are making the final version of it when they're editing it. Yeah, you're going to approve it and everything, but they're going to be picking through the footage and how to cut it together and sort of make that rough cut pretty much by themselves, unless you're sitting in there with them. And that's up to the director and how involved they want to be in the whole process. So different directors do different things, different editors do different things, and it's just very subjective about how
so
to
somebody said editing is a grammar, that you need to use to put the sentences together. I think it was pretty profound.
Right.
Like right now, I think the editing has completely taken off in a different direction. Before you had, they used to splice the footage together, right? And it was completely different. So it was more dependent on what you shot. But now, I mean, with the tools, you can pretty much change the way the footage looks, which is completely different from, you might not have gotten a telephoto lens to basically do a zoom shot, but with the footage that you have, you can easily zoom into somebody's face, without really even having the footage, because of 16K or 12K, whatever, right? And getting the high footage,
reframing it, punching in when you want.
Cropping it, So.
Did you understand what I meant? I know that I overanalyze sometimes, and that's probably a flaw. But did it come across like what I meant? No.
Sure, yeah.
No, to you, Coda. Did you understand what I meant?
Oh yeah.
No? Oh, okay, yeah. Does it makes more sense now? Thank you, Vish, for helping me out there.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
All right. So
I think editing is
go ahead.
Editing is a different thing altogether. It's in a world in itself. So
yeah.
Some more.
And I also overanalyze, and I feel like if it were me, I'd probably just be analyzing the story before even getting there, because I'm way too anxious. So that's where my mind was.
I mean, and that's why you have so many different people working on a film too, and why you usually don't want to have you doing everything, because having different people's inputs and their take on it actually usually adds and makes the movie better, because there's different questions like, why are we doing it like this? And then it's like, oh, why are we doing it like this? And if it's just one person's vision the whole way through, it can work, but it can also be something where they don't want to accept that that thing might be able to be improved. And so they just keep it the exact way they want it. And it actually makes the film a bit worse than it would have had if it had multiple inputs from different people chiming in on how to creatively make it better.
One of my favorite things to do whenever Coda brings me an idea for a story is for me to just think of it and pick it apart and like try to poke holes in it as much as I can so that we can make it a story that I couldn't tear apart because I'm picky as hell. So it's just, yay, let's see how we can make this the best story ever. And okay, what would people think? How would people analyze it? How could people take it? All that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, anyway, like the other thing I wanted to say, what was I going to say? Is that, oh, I mean, like Brian always brings this up. It's like whenever we're talking about one of these new subjects, it's always like, well, that's a different skill set. And that's why independent filmmakers, when they're trying to take on everything, struggle so much because they're trying to do so many different skill sets. You need a lot of different skills to do every single job in a film because there's so many different things to look at. Budget and production is, more on the business side of things, and marketing is a whole other ball game. And then you have distributing, which is learning how to pitch things to people and being a good communicator and things like that. And you have editing, which is a lot more technical, and sound, which is very technical. And there's a bunch of different skill sets that go into it, directing and producing, being leaders, those kinds of skill sets. And then you have very technical and creative mixtures, like being a director of photography, but you have to know a lot about cameras. And so, you know how to have a good understanding of the movement. So all of these different skill sets.
And if you're in the indie scene, you have to know at least a little bit about multiple things, because you're going to have to know, even if it's just who to hire or who to get on your project, knowing if they're good or what to look for.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, that's why I like to know a little bit of everything, so I can know if they know what they're talking about, not so I can take over everything. But yeah, so it is very difficult for independent filmmakers to get their stuff made, because you sometimes have to rely on yourself to get it all done, because sometimes if you're having these people that are canceling on you and things like that, or you just can't afford to hire this sound guy like Brian, and he says, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and just be my sound guy if I have to. And then so he learned how to do sound, and just things like that, So sometimes that's why my whole philosophy is just learn a little bit of everything. And if you like it, delve deeper into it, but at least have an understanding of what everyone's doing and what the job functions are needed on the set in the first place. Anyway, back to L cuts, J cuts. So L cuts and J cuts, like I was saying, they're used a lot in conversations. However, using a hard cut, which is just cutting from one image to the next, there's no transition or anything, that's the hard cut, or just a standard cut. That can be used in a conversation to make it feel a little maybe more awkward, or maybe the people are just meeting and they're on their first date, so they're a little uncomfortable with each other at first, and maybe it was a blind date. And so you could do hard cuts between the conversation where the audio from one person only starts whenever the camera's looking at them. And then as they get more comfortable, maybe the guy or the girl makes a joke and they start laughing, and they start getting a little more comfortable with each other. Then you can start introducing the J cuts and the L cuts, where the audio is leading into the next clip, or the audio is extending past the clip to the next one, to where it feels a little more like they are more comfortable with each other, more comfortable sharing that space, that audio space. So those little things actually start to make a huge difference. And it's not all just music. It's not all just camera movement. It's that, the cuts, the way it's cut, and the music that all combine together to make those emotions come across, as well as the acting and the performance, of course. But yeah, those are just some things that you might want to keep in mind, that sometimes not doing L and J cuts in a conversation, or sometimes there's reasons to just do hard cuts. Don't always feel like you need to use these, and don't overuse them unless it's for the story. Always do it for the story would be the best way to try to edit, if it makes sense and it feels right. All right, the next thing is about cuts is when you're cutting on action, which you don't even really notice that it's happening because we're already expecting to see what he's doing. They're cutting on him opening his jacket, revealing the weapons. So they cut to the weapons getting revealed. And that's a good way to get editing to kind of flow. We'll talk about flow and timing and pacing, I think next week, but it's a good way to get like the timing really good and really right. If the person's turning their head to the right or the left, normally the audience wants to see what they're looking at. You know, what are they seeing? Why are they making that expression? Well, now you can cut away from them looking over there to what they're looking at. And so cutting on action is a very good way to keep the story flowing and kind of make it seem like there's not really any cuts happening because as the audience, we're expecting to see what's being revealed at any given moment or what the characters are looking at or where they're going. And so if they turn to the right, when we cut to the right to show where they're walking, it doesn't feel as jarring as if we just cut to the right out of nowhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. Cutting on action, it's a big one.
I guess I'd also say note how in that previous one that you were looping, when it cuts, if you want to go back.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go back.
It doesn't cut at the exact point in time that it's left off. Like his hands aren't in the exact same position at the cut. It goes back a little bit in time.
Yeah.
Just something to note that you don't have to. It's like it's not an error if you do that. And often it's done
definitely.
more often than people notice.
Yeah, and as long as you're not noticing it, nobody really minds. If it was 4 seconds back, they might notice it and it'd be kind of a continuity error. But yeah, that's exactly like they're trying to reveal the weapon, so they're showing him opening his jacket, but then they also want to show him revealing it fully, so you're not seeing the weapons before it gets moved out of the way. So they actually go back in time a bit to show that happening.
You do see this a lot in like like action movie explosion shots when they'll show the explosion happen 4 times in a row.
From different angles, it's like the same shot, the same explosion, it just keeps re-happening from different angles.
Understand, if you pay so much money for the explosion, I'm gonna make you watch it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, we exploded that building. You're gonna see every angle of it. All right. You can also, when someone stops their action, like on this take, well, it's really little, maybe I can make it bigger. When he stops, we're seeing what he sees, we're just looking at his feet, and then we cut away to what he's looking at right when he stops his motion. So that's also cutting on action, or the lack of. We already talked about match cuts. I was just going to show like a few more examples. Match cuts can either be that everything's the same, it's just in a different area, or the person is just either the surroundings are the same and it's just a different person or something like that, or the person's in the same framing and so they're matching him to the area, but they're not matching everything in the whole scene. So match cuts can be either or, and you can even just use one part of the scene to match. Match cuts don't even have to look exactly the same. Sometimes they are matched in a more of an idea than an actual visual, where it's like you match what is it? I think it's Space Odyssey, 2001, or what is that called? 2001 Space Odyssey, where he throws a bone up and then it match cuts it to a spaceship. And it's just like, it's more of the idea than the exact framing that matches. And there's also a scene, I don't know what movie it's from, but the guy blows out a match and they use that to match cut it to a sunrise because the color orange, or because, I don't know, whatever the idea was. I never saw the movie, I just saw that scene being used as match cut. So match cut doesn't always have to mean that the framing is exactly the same or that it looks exactly right. Sometimes it can just be matched by the idea of what's trying to represent. That's what a match cut would be.
Like something you see a lot in like romance stories is like there'll be like the big kiss and then it cuts to like fireworks or something.
Yeah, you're right. And that's the match cut of the emotion of what's going on with the characters. But it's not exactly matching the visual. And something like this is matching the movement and more like the visual. It's not exactly framed exactly the same, but it's just matching the movement of his head going down and her getting ready to lay down in the pool. So match cuts are used a lot of different ways. We already went over jump cuts, but basically Mel, you asked this last time, I think. They don't have to be in the exact same location like in this. This is jump cuts, but the framing is generally the same so that it doesn't throw everyone off. And so we can see he's just walking down the hallway, looking in different classrooms or whatever this hallway is. So it doesn't have to have the exact same framing. It doesn't have to have the camera stationary. It just has to make sense enough to where we understand that it's just jumping through time and we're not jumping all over the place through space and different areas. Doing that would be more like a montage, which are kind of like a jump cuts, but they're in various locations and showing a longer passage of time usually. Jump cuts can also be used to speed up action. I thought I had one of this, but someone reloading a gun, if they're trying to like speed up the intensity, sometimes they'll use jump cuts of them like getting ready to reload and then jump cut to them already reloading or cocking the gun. So, you know, we're not seeing the whole thing of the bullet go in the barrel and then them cocking the gun. We just see them getting ready to do that and then cocking the gun. And then all of a sudden they're zipping it up in their bag and then they're picking up the bag and leaving. A lot of those little jump cuts just to like jump through time and speed up the intensity of what's getting ready to happen. That can also happen. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the exact same thing. Jump cuts are just like, you want to use them as long as they still make sense to whatever's happening in the scene and it doesn't confuse whoever's watching it. Just like we can tell, obviously, like they're driving for a long time. We're cutting to different parts because the framing is the same. We can tell he's just walking down the hall and we're cutting to different parts of him in the hallway without having to watch him go from point A to point B. So it doesn't always have to exactly match, but it has to make enough sense to where we understand what's happening.
Also, like, just make sure you have a good reason to do it. Because I know jump cuts are becoming more of a thing nowadays, where people, the topic they're talking about isn't interesting, so they'll use jump cuts to kind of like keep you know, watching the video because they're not really saying anything interesting. Like I'm talking to you now, like just imagine if there was a video of me talking and then like every 5 seconds is like a jump cut for some reason. Like I didn't really go anywhere or do anything interesting. It just keeps jump cutting, which
Yeah,
I see that a lot now, and it's annoying because I'm like, what you're, you know, like stop, like it's just
it's a different convention. I would say that the conventions for internet videos are very different to the cinema.
Yeah.
Like it's not a one translatable medium.
Right. I can't really find an example, but cutaway and insert shots. I'm gonna like touch on this just quickly. We talked about this already before, but cutaways they cut away to a shot that has some connection to the scene or the emotion or whatever's going on, but aren't in the immediate area. They weren't really seen in the master shot when we saw the whole area before. So they might be on a different angle of the shot, or they might be in a different location. A cutaway could be a lady overhearing a couple yelling. Maybe a couple's having a really big fight and they're yelling. And there's a cutaway to a lady outside the apartment, just looking up at the window because she hears some screaming going on. And then we cut back in to the actual scene. That could be a cutaway. An insert shot is a lot more specific, and it's used to showcase elements of the story, like maybe they're fighting and he's getting ready to reach for a bat. And so we're showing an insert shot of him grabbing that bat really close, really extreme close up of the bat and him grabbing it. So then we can kind of make sense of where that bat came from and what's happening in the scene. So insert shots are used more to show elements within the scene that's already being shown or within the same space. Cutaways are used more for like showing something kind of connected to the story, but not exactly in the same area. Cutaway could also be people at a restaurant, and they cut away to maybe a robber running away from police. We cut back to the restaurant, and then we see a guy running past they see a guy running past the window with the police chasing after them. That way it just it makes a little more sense for the audience of what happened and why that's happening. We saw the scene earlier of that guy running from the police, just really quickly a glimpse of it. So then it makes more sense when he's running past the window for our characters. Things like that can be used a lot to intertwine different story elements. The cutaways almost always have like some connection to what's either getting ready to happen or what is happening outside of that immediate area. A cut in is very similar to insert shots, and often they're kind of intertwined, uses the same thing. So I'm not exactly sure if this is 100%, but the example was that you could focus on a particular detail of the characters, like maybe the character's feeling awkward. So you're showing you're cutting into her hand and her hand's just doing a little twitch, showing that she's nervous. And then going back to the discussion again. So it's basically the same thing as an insert shot. It's just, it's not an additional element, I guess. It's more of just like the characters themselves. But again, I'm not really 100% on the differences between those two.
Sounds like it might be that you're like cutting into a more close-up shot of whatever, of an element that is already in the previous shot.
Like in frame already?
Perhaps.
That makes sense. Yeah, because like if you're inserting a shot of him grabbing the bat wasn't really necessarily in frame. So that makes sense. Either way, those, like if someone's asking for one, I'm sure you'll be able to ask what they mean. And then the last thing that we are going to go into more detail about at another time is cross-cutting, otherwise known as parallel editing. And it's a technique that cuts between action in two simultaneous scenes. They're usually happening at the same time, like kind of like what I just said about the robber. If he was another scene happening where that's going to affect the story, the robber running away from the cops is could be a cross-cut, not just a cutaway, but a cross-cut to show the scene happening while those people are eating in the restaurant. So those two scenes are happening at the same time, and we're cross-cutting between them to show what is going on. And maybe he throws, a rock through the window at the restaurant, so it affects our characters, and that's why those two scenes are cross-cutting. Another thing that's used a lot is the people are looking for the murderer or the bad guy who just ran away. So we're cross-cutting between the inside with the person, the bad guy, and we're cutting back to the cops outside, getting ready to go into the building and look for him. Cross-cutting doesn't always have to be at the same time for that exact reason, though. Sometimes it's used to throw us off, to make it seem like the cops are getting ready to get him. But really, once the cops get up there, we see that, oh, never mind, this is later on in time. So the guy did this, he murdered the person, and then he left and he got out of there. But it cross-cutting made it seem like they were getting ready to get him. They were getting ready to catch him right then and there. So that's the reason those are used. We'll go more deeper into it later on and discuss anything that's a little bit more in depth about it. But it's used a lot to show two simultaneous things happening at once. And it's either to add tension, drama, to show a connection between the two scenes. There's a bunch of different reasons why you might do it. And we'll dive into it a little more later on. But those are the main cuts that you'll find in films. And I mean, like, that's the main ones you'll see happening a lot of the times. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that or anything to add? Yeah, you okay? Bless you.
Good timing.
Yeah.
I thought
No, good stuff.
I thought the sound was off. I'm sorry.
All right, last thing I'm gonna try to jump into this.
I'm
What?
gonna head out. Have a good night, everyone.
All right, thanks, Mel. Have a good one.
I'm so sorry for anyone
All
right
right,
here.
last one we're talking about is wait, why'd you say so sorry? Oh, see, now if we were compressing it, that's the noise I would compress now. Make sure that there's no loud sneeze happening in the middle.
I'm sorry, okay?
No, I was just joking around. All right. So the last thing we're going to talk about is
you sneezed and Mel left.
No, that's something Koda would say. Right after you sneezed, Mel left. You probably
Last thing we're going to talk about is film grants and fellowships. Film grants are usually unrestricted funds that do not need to be repaid. You have to apply for them, and there's different kinds. So let's get into it. It's important to note that films are normally funded through several different avenues. They're not fully financed through grants most of the time. I mean, a super low budget might be, but normally if you are lucky and determined and willing enough to get one of these grants, that's only going to be part of your funding. You're not going to try to make your whole film out of it for the most part.
Those of you that are in the WhatsApp group and those of you that aren't and would like to see the article, one of the articles I sent out, it's in the syllabus. It was wonderful about this. It was incredibly brutally honest, which I love. And it gave some really great practical tips as far as finding investors, as far as going out for grants, what to do, why it's important, why you should do it, even, like what reasons why people don't do it and reasons why those reasons are dumb, basically. Or those reasons might not be the best reasons or might be holding you back from trying something. Really, really good. I recommend.
Yeah.
Continue.
So government film grants are normally lottery based, while others that are from like private foundations or something like that, they are more merit based and usually require certain criteria to be met to be able to apply or be able to qualify for it. Now, some of these are from 2016, so they might not even be around anymore. That's another thing. When you are looking for film grants, it's going to be a lot of research because they're constantly popping up. Some of them that have been around for a while, sometimes they go down. Some are annual, so they continuously come back. Or, sometimes, again, they just stop doing it after so many years for whatever reason. And there's not really a lot of notice or communication about it for the most part. Usually it just kind of ends and people are like, where to go? And then they eventually find out, oh, they're not doing that anymore. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the grants you'll have to look up individually. There's not really one site that's going to show you every single grant that's out there for films. You're going to have to do some research and look it up to find the ones, especially ones that fit your criteria. There's one from 2016 anyway. There's one called Diversity Development Fund, and it's up to $15,000 for research and development on projects that have not yet started pre-production. If you are not diverse, like me, then you can apply for this grant if you bring someone that is. So if Priscilla was working with me on a film because she is Brazilian, she's a minority, I'm
disabled.
I can apply for that grant.
So like every single thing, apparently, I tick every box.
She's a woman, she's a minority, and she has a disability. So any grants that are requiring those things, most of the time they require it for somebody on your set or working on your film. It might require certain positions. You'd have to look into each specific grant and what the requirements are. But for the most part, if you have somebody that meets their requirements,
but give them the opportunity. I would say give them the opportunity, not because you want to tick a box though, but because you actually believe in them, you want to give them a chance too. Because that's just kind of a jerk move. Like, oh, I'm hiring you to tick a box. Like that really makes me mad. So like Code actually believes that I'm a good hard worker and he would hire me because of that. And also, nepotism. But other than that, because he's married to me. But other than that, like he actually would hire me because he thinks I'm good. Like, trust me, if he didn't, married to me or not, he would be like, honey, I'm sorry, you're a liability. I don't want you on my side. Because he'd just be that honest, because he's that honest. But he actually does think I'm a good worker, and so he would actually hire me.
Right. And certain well, that one specifically wants it for diversity. So you would have to have a minority of some sort working with you on your set, or to be one.
In addition to, it's not just like, there are some that's like, 40% of your cast or crew or something like that. But right now they're focusing a lot more on like minority run films, like cinematographers, directors, writers, kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to depend on the grant you're going for and why you want to read the requirements of each one, because they're not all going to be unanimous on their on what they require for that diversity to be filled, that requirement to be filled. Then there's also Independent Filmmaker Project, which only funds projects completely funded by grants with 3 million or less for a budget. So there's one where you might, if it's still around, you might be able to get it, and you'd have to fund your entire project through that grant.
To answer Raphael's question, because he was like, the government one must have strings attached. It's mostly like if it's a documentary or if it's something like an interview, something that will either help the publicity of the country or the state, something like that would probably be more government based, I would assume, or I've heard of. There might be exceptions, but those are the ones I know of that got like grants from the state or region, tri-state area, stuff like that.
No, yeah, it does get very narrow, which is what I was getting ready to just say, Raphael. Many grants are state or location based. Some are for women only, others are for certain minorities. Others are a mixture of multiple criteria, like maybe it has to be an Asian woman that lives in the DC area or something like that. And it can be that specific. So you have to really look into what requirements you might meet and see if there's any grants available for you or for somebody on your production. And you can see if that if they meet the requirement.
Some are religious based as well. Like we heard a few Jewish based ones, stuff like that.
Yep, some are grants for specific topics, like what kind of content you're making, or what kind of what the story is based on. If it's for that kind of content, it might just be for documentaries. Some are for short films only, some are for feature length only, and they have different requirements of what feature length means. Some say 90 minutes plus, some might say 50 minutes plus. It just depends on that specific.
The shortest I've seen has been like
Yeah.
6.
I've seen short films under 30 minutes. I've seen short films under 50 minutes. So, I mean, it just really varies depending on what
Yeah.
they count as a
And
short
that's
film.
why one of the articles was like, you can ask people, oh, is there a one place that I can go and see all these grants and see all and he basically like, I can't translate it to English, but we call it like a slap with a glove. Basically he was like, well, sorry, buddy, you're gonna have to do your own research when it comes to this and actually, you know, go out there and do your own research, because it is very region based. It's very location based. It's some of them are very particular. And it gave an example, like, I think the example he gave was like a Muslim woman from California is not going, and a white British filmmaker in London, they're like going to be looking for two different things, and the things that they qualify for are going to be completely different as well. So it's a completely different spectrum. There are websites that if you put like, Virginia film grants or something like that, you will find like based on the area or based on the genre or stuff like that. But it will most likely require you to do more than just one or two websites of research. You'll have to actually go in depth.
Yeah, some are based just on sexual orientation or content that shows it. So LGBTQ, if you have a story about that, or maybe, or you are in that group, then you would meet that recommendation. There's also ones like Priscilla said for certain religions, and there's a lot of other specific criteria when applying, which is why it's kind of like applying for school scholarships. There's a lot of criteria that you have to meet before you can even apply. No point in applying for the ones that you're not going to meet. But unlike school scholarships, you can meet those requirements if you have somebody on your set that works for your production, and they can apply for it because it's a collaborative effort to try to get funding for that film. So if they're willing to, they can either apply for it, or you can apply for it and say that you have, you know, whatever they're looking for. That's one of my producers, or that's my DP, or that's my district director, or whatever, like something like that.
Or if you're working alongside, like if it's directed by two people and one of them is of that community or wants to write a story about it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's also some that are for specific age groups, as well as some that are only for new filmmakers that haven't made a feature yet. So, or, you know, there's also vice versa. There's ones that have made a feature or two only. And so they want to see up and coming artists that have been trying and working in the field. And so that's the only ones they're willing to give money to and things like that. So there's tons of different requirements, and that's why you want to do your research before you just start going in and trying to apply for every single thing. Raphael said, it sounds like it could be very motivating. It's like having a basic prompt for your specific passion project.
Yes and no. I have also heard that it can feel, from certain people, I have also heard that it can feel like they're, say this delicately. Some people have said that it can feel motivating in a way, but it also feels like, oh, you're trapped in this particular specific thing. It feels like a handout sometimes, or it can also feel like, okay, now I can only look for these specific things, or now I'm competing with this group, which would be smaller, but because all of the people in this group are competing at once for this project instead of more spread out, it's a little more competitive. It's way more competitive, as opposed to like different one that's for everyone and they're just looking at your idea or your story, then you could, and it's just story based, then it's like, okay, I might have more of a chance. When it's more on like ethnicity, race, or like stuff, religion, stuff like that, it's a little more niche. So
Yeah.
it can
But
feel
that's
a little more,
good.
Yeah,
So
it's
that
kinda
can be
good.
good if you meet the requirements.
no,
Like,
definitely, but
Like
I'm
if
just
it's your
saying
thing, but I feel like it could be it could kill it. If the one thing that could really kill it, I feel, is that if you don't get chosen for it, that just kills all the motivation you had for that one project.
yeah,
no, not
because
necessarily, because I'll actually get in this. This is later in my notes. I don't want to
no,
skip
yeah, but
around,
I'm just
but
saying
there's
that,
like, you can a lot of grants require you to do some stuff that's you're going to be having to do in pre-production or development anyway.
no,
So
yeah,
you'll actually be moving forward with your project in production than you would if you never applied to a grant, because the
Yeah.
grants are going to require different what?
no, go ahead.
Because the grants are going to require different things like a budget and like some other stuff that I'll get into in a bit when I'm getting down into it in my notes. Like I said, I don't want to jump around and get lost, so I'm just
Right.
going to go in order.
Coda will explain it better, but basically the way he explained it was there are things that you need to do when prepping for your film anyway that you're also going to need to do while applying for a film grant. And those things will actually help you think more about your project, will help you know how to pitch it to people, will help you become more comfortable understanding your story and pitching it to people. I just mean as far as like those specific grants, I have heard people say that it can feel more intimidating because it's not just story based and there's more of a competition because it's more niche, as opposed to a more wider spectrum where it might be a little more story based. So there are pros and cons to
I don't-
both. It's a great
I
opportunity.
disagree. but
Awesome.
If
that
it's more niche, there's less competition. That's just how it works.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's the thing. Like they're going by, you have all of these minorities going for this one thing, and so sometimes it can feel like your story might not be heard as much, or you might just be one more, and that might make you a little more insecure about it. I don't know. Pros and cons to both. Basically,
I don't know. I still disagree. Because if some grant was like men that live in Petersburg, Virginia, that haven't made a feature film, I'd be much more inclined to win that grant to get the money from that, because
yeah,
I meet all that requirement. If it's just someone who lives in the United States that have a good story, well, now my story is competing with all of the United States people that decide to go after it. So I think the niche ones are better because they're way more focused. And if you meet all the requirements, then you are way more likely to be able to get it.
So
yeah,
it sounds like
pros and cons in the
it sounds
sense of,
very
like,
similar to scholarships, but like
yeah.
the wider ones, the more like national ones, they often have more money, whereas the niche ones, it's usually less money, but you
Yeah.
are competing against less people, so it does give you an advantage in one spot.
Exactly. There are pros and cons to both. There are pros and cons to both. And I have also heard people say that because they're doing it like, oh, a minority based scholarship or minority based thing, that they feel obligated to speak about those topics and not as much a wider range of stories, because they want to be represented and they want to give representation. So that's another con. Pros and cons to both. Like I said, it really depends on your perspective. It depends on what you're going for. I was looking at the pros and cons to both because I was curious, and with this will go into like a whole other topic, so I'm not even gonna talk about it. But basically, there are pros and cons to both. And at the end of the day, me personally, I don't know. I feel weird about it. Maybe it's because I don't consider myself diverse enough, I guess. I don't think I'm like I wouldn't want to apply maybe for like for me, it's hard. I've never felt disabled enough. I've never felt diverse enough. I've never felt minority enough. So I would feel weird about applying for stuff like that.
Take advantage when you can.
That's just me.
What are you
I
talking
know,
about?
like I'm legally blind, but I can still see, and I'm not as dark as most as like other Latin people, and I'm not, and I'm bi, but I'm not gay. So it's just all that kind of stuff that you always feel like, am I taking the spot away from someone else? Type of thing.
Okay.
It's a moral discussion. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
You speak
Anyway,
Portuguese, Priscilla?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a lot of Portugal grads you can apply to.
Well, I'm from Brazil, so it's like not Portugal, but it's
Right? But the language, right? At least the language is the same.
yeah.
Isn't it?
Oh, so you're saying that Portuguese speaking people, there's a grant just
Yeah.
for that? Really? Now that's interesting. I did not
Yeah,
know
because
that.
they
it gets very narrow. It gets very specific on what the requirements might be. So
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly it's like they are promoting the culture, right? So, who else has a better perspective than somebody who speaks Portuguese and who understands the ways, of Portuguese life, right? So that's sometimes what happens is,
Well, there you go. I
maybe-
wouldn't feel good about that either because I lived half and half. I lived here. I lived there.
Yeah,
Oh
so
my
surprising, surprisingly, what happens is a lot of people who are outside, right? So let's say people who are in Portugal, right, or people who are in Brazil, they have no perspective of what a Portuguese person would feel like in the US. So if the movie is based on a person who has come from either one of those places and then lives his life here and basically hardships or difficulties or maybe character that you're trying to portray, definitely a lot of there is a big audience out there, like the people in Portugal would be interested in
I
having a
think
perspective.
it's just a matter of me being too guilt ridden, because even then I'd be like, well, there are people who've lived worse experiences than me, so am I really wanted like I just be making
you
excuses.
still
for-
apply to everything you can to try to
I
get
know,
the project.
I
made.
know. It's just, it is hard. It's a hard thing because you're always, because it's such a niche thing, you're always like, at least me, I would be like, am I taking the chance away from someone else that might deserve it more or might have a better?
Well, you can
like,
ask the same question if it's a wider range of people. Like if it's everyone in the whole country, then are you taking it away from someone? Yeah, because you won. Like that's
So there is other aspect to it, right? So what
Yeah.
happens is usually with the grants, they have like an advisor, grant advisor, right? And he has resources which you would probably not have access to if you don't go in that direction. And those resources may be very valuable because from a storytelling perspective, like
Yeah.
Sundance Labs, right? They have once they give you a fellowship, you go there, and then basically they have a panel of directors, screenwriters, cinematographers, who are advising people. So it's not just the grant, but it's actually more than the grant. And sometimes what happens is even the studios, they give away equipment grants, right? I mean, let's say if you want to shoot your
At the
film.
end of the day, it would be story based, right? At the end of the day, the best story.
No,
would
not really. No, for the studios, probably if they think that there is a potential, right? And they would give you the grant to just have you access their camera. It could be a Panasonic expensive camera, or it could be, very whatever they have out there, because they want to promote, talented people. So it all depends, actually. I mean, you could be saying that. I mean, the grant world is a big world, and and you could be using, those dollars out there, which is for people who are filmmakers, right? And if you don't use it, somebody else will use it. But
That's a
so,
good point, Raphael.
yeah, that kind of thing. So it's
I-
there,
I-
it's for you to
And I do think I would. I
No,
would
for
be-
real. Like, yeah.
I just,
would've
yeah,
thought-
I've
For
always
instance,
been about that
in-
because I've always felt kind of like, well, I'm not American, but I'm not totally Brazilian either, and I'm not totally blind. I'm not totally.
So you're
this.
the only one who can speak on all those things at once.
see, not
Yo,
the
that
whole
is
thing.
true.
That's
In
the whole
Norway,
thing.
what
Like you are unique to where you aren't, you know, you've done both.
You're that intersection of all
Yeah.
of those things.
That's a different thing. That's a different experience. So
Right. So
I-
in Norway, right? In Norway, they have if you know a person who is Norwegian or who's from that area, and he is part of your crew, they will fund the whole project for you. If you have a story which is based in Norway, or Norway character, or Norway, links to it, they'll just fund the whole movie for you. So
so there are things like that also. So you wouldn't know until I tried to look for somebody who was from Norway, but I couldn't find it.
Man, I'm sorry. You didn't go on Craigslist looking for Norwegian. Nah, it would have sounded weird.
No, even Canadian, right? Canada has big grants where you can actually, they have like a partnership with South Africa.
Dude, you want to
So-
find people from all over the world, go to New Zealand. I was on like a dating app for a week and I met a German, I met a Polish, I met an Australian, I met a British person, and like so many people
Yeah,
to talk.
Raphael's right. It's getting late, honey. You're talking. You're going off topic.
I didn't mean
Right.
to throw you. That wasn't my intent at all. I just was trying to like talk about pros and cons, and then I was like my personal experience with like that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm sorry if I made
No, I
it
mean
about-
that was fine. But talking about New Zealand and how many people they have. And
No,
all
I
that,
was just giving Vish a suggestion. If he wants diversity, like people are going there on vacation on holiday visas, which work holiday visas. which is-
America has a lot of diversity.
No, yes.
People in New Zealand are very friendly.
They're super friendly. They drink a bit too much for my taste, but they're like some of the nicest people in my experience. Obviously, I was there for 2 years, but it was 2.5. But it was great, and I was there on a work holiday visa, and I was blown away by the amount
All
of
right,
people.
honey, I'm going to cut you off. You can talk about
Yeah.
this after the meeting.
Sorry, they have a deal with it. They have a deal
Nope,
with
cutting you off.
and-
Anyway,
and there you
nope,
go.
nope.
Done.
Seriously, we have to move on. Raphael's
I'm
right.
done. I'm done. I'm sorry. I'm done.
All right. Anyway, back to it. So there's a lot of different requirements that go into film, that go into grants, filmmaking grants. So before you dive into a grant application, even if you meet the requirements, you still want to take some time to learn about the group behind the grant. The more you know about them and why they're offering it, the more you can cater your application towards what they're looking for. So they might be looking for new and up and coming filmmakers, and they just so happen to be looking for women that are a minority. Okay, so then if you're a woman who's also a minority and you're an up and coming filmmaker who hasn't made anything, then if you look into their company and you see that they're mainly just looking into getting up and coming filmmakers, then you wouldn't want to focus your application on the minority woman aspect. You'd want to focus it more on I'm an up and coming filmmaker aspect. And then you'd have a more likely chance of getting that grant because you meet their requirements, but just because they have those requirements doesn't mean that they want to hear specifically about that. I think Priscilla even was talking about that, how some people said that's a con because then they feel like they have to speak on it. Well, that's something you want to look into in the company itself. Are they looking for, are they more looking for minorities because they, maybe it's a Black owned company and they really, or a Black owned production company, and they want to bring up other Black up and coming filmmakers. So maybe they are looking more towards the minority aspect of being Black. Maybe they're looking more towards the up and coming filmmaker side. Maybe they're looking to something else. That's just something you kind of want to research and see what this company is or whoever's offering the grant, why they're offering it and what they're looking for. And you can usually find a lot of information about why they started it and everything and the about them and all that on the website. And so you want to like kind of deep dive into that before you even start the application, just so you can kind of have, get a better chance from the get-go of making a application that's more catered to whatever they're looking for. You also want to make sure you follow the instructions. That's a huge thing. If you're taking all the time to apply for this grant, make sure that you know all of the things that they require you to do. If they say it has to be 500 words about yourself, don't send it in with 499 words. That's going to automatically get you disqualified from the grant, because there's other people who paid more attention than you and saw that it was 500 and made sure that they had at least 500 words when they did it. Or maybe they have a limit on what they can do, or maybe you also need to send in a short vlog clip of yourself and explain it. If you're missing any of those things, those key parts of the application,
Doesn't matter.
that's going to just automatically get you disqualified. What?
Details matter, yeah, and reading everything and having that information, not just skimming through it or not just reading the headline and then applying without looking.
Right. And going along with that, like the grants themselves, the different ones, most of them are looking for these 4 basic pieces of info. Who are you and what is this project? How are you going to get that project done with the schedules, the budgets, logistics of it? How do you plan on getting it filmed and distributed? Why is it important to you? Why should people care? And why are you the one that needs to tell this story? So the 4 pieces are the who, the what, the how, and the why. Different grants, again, this is why you want to look into the company, because different grants might be more interested in the other aspects. They might be more interested in the why than they are in the who, the what, and the how. Some might be more interested in the how. They might want to make sure that you know what you're doing and you have that budget ready and you have a realistic expectation of how you're going to logistically get that film complete, so that they feel more comfortable giving you the money, because they're giving you their money after all. So they want to make sure that, some are more interested in making sure that you know how to handle money. So the how and all the budgets and all of that stuff that you send into them needs to be a little more accurate for them than it would maybe be for somebody else who's more interested in who. Like if they're looking for up and coming filmmakers, maybe they're more interested in the who. What's your story? How are you unique? If they're looking for, again, if they're looking for a minority woman, then Priscilla can talk about how she's lived in both, and she has this unique experience that not many other people have. And she's also disabled and has 10% vision. Well, she can add to that. Now they have the who, and they are more interested because they were looking for people more than they were looking for their budgets and their stuff. But then another grant might be less interested in that and not really care who Priscilla is as much as they care about making sure she knows how to produce a film. So those are just things you need to make sure, like, know what you're getting into a little bit before you just start doing it, because it is very time consuming. Grants take a lot of time. It's like if anyone's ever applied for scholarships, it takes a long time.
I would say also, even if they are looking for that specifically, the ethnicity part or the background part, still make sure you have a good story and you know how to pitch it, because that is a crucial part to applying. Pitching your story, telling them what it's about, explaining it, making them interested in it. Don't just rely, obviously you're not going to, if your story, you believe it's good enough, but really think about why you think it's good enough for this scholarship, why you think they should help you fund it. And maybe you'll find some things along the way, that'll even help you make it better, like was in the article. But make sure you know how to pitch your story as well as who you are. Basically, make sure you're ready for both.
Yeah, definitely. If you don't feel like you have a good enough story, you shouldn't even be applying for a grant, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. But
in the first place. But you can also apply for grants when you feel like you have a good idea. Some grants are specifically for research and development, which is like script writing and attaching people's names and getting people interested in it and writing out that script. So, there's some grants specifically for that phase. if you feel like you have a good idea, you just don't have it fully written yet. But then you can't apply to those other grants that are just for pre-production, production, post-production, or development and marketing, because those are for those phases of filmmaking. And you're not in that yet if all you have is an idea. Likewise, if you're already starting pre-production, you can't apply for development and research, because those are for script writing, getting people attached, getting the crew, getting cast, things like that. If you're already in pre-production, you're already doing stuff, and you're already starting to try to get like the budget together and everything like that, then that grant that's specifically just for that first beginning phase isn't going to be available for you. So no reason to apply for it. Apply for a pre-production grant instead. But always be sure to give yourself enough time to fill out the application. It's not normally going to be a quick thing. It's not going to be a thing you can do in a day. There's a lot of requirements that they're going to make you do depending on what the grant is. Many of them, like the pre-production and production ones, are going to they're going to ask you if you have a budget ready or a top sheet. They're going to ask if you have a treatment, a visual treatment, something kind of like, or a film treatment where you have the title like this with the log line, the characters, and the synopsis, where it's maybe a 1 to 2 page thing, just like of a really short summary of that project that you want to do, and you know who's in it and what is it about. So they're going to want stuff like that. They're going to want visual treatments like a lookbook or a mood board, where you're just kind of showing some pictures of what you're going for. You know, not every single one require all of these things, but it's always good to put them in anyway, because if you're making a production, if you're making a short film or a feature film, you're usually going to want all this stuff anyway, so you can communicate it to your crew. And you might as well start it on it and try to get it to the grant. So the more things you give to them, the more visual things you have, the more things you have prepared, even if they don't require it, it's just going to boost your chances, because it's going to show that you are serious about it, you're professional, and you also know what you're doing. And it's going to give you a higher chance of getting that grant. Other things you might be able to send in are like concept art, maybe storyboards, or other visuals that really help to sell your story, your idea. Because even on script, they don't know exactly what you're going for, you know? Film is a visual medium, so sending in some visuals of your ideas and what you're going for is a really good way to pitch it to them. It goes into pitching the idea. So if you're trying to pitch it to the grants, you're basically pitching it to investors. So you need to show them what it's going to be and how it's going to be, and that what you're capable of as best you can to get them to give you that loan. Also, if you have any previous work or you have a demo reel, you could send both of those in. If you've made a short film or a feature film before, send them a link so they can see the entire thing. But also, if you have that demo reel, if you have both, send both, because they might want to just see the demo reel to get a sense of what your style is like. And then if they like it, they can look into the actual full feature length film or full short film that you made, so they get a sense of how you create a story from start to finish, and have a better idea from there. And you also just want to show how passionate you are, but don't fake it, because it's going to be easy to spot it. So don't pretend like you're passionate about it if really you're just kind of, you know, trying to get money. Like if you're not as passionate about the project, don't try to pretend like, you know, you're passionate about something when you're really not. Or like just different story elements. Like if you don't really care about this character, that they want to make sure you have someone in your film that represents whoever, and you have a character in your film, but they're not really the main aspect, don't try to pump it up and make it seem like they're the biggest thing in the whole story when really they're not. As long as you meet that requirement, you can still apply for the grant, but just know that, you know, you don't want to lie and pretend like something's better or more significant than it is.
But you might discover that it goes deeper as you pitch it or as you work on it. You're like, oh, you might work on the project and you might make it deeper or better as you get ready to pitch it or to send in that application.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, like that was the next steps about is even if you don't get the grant, which goes back into what Raphael said. This is my response to that, Raphael. Even if you don't get the grant, writing and applying can help you with the project. You're going to start budgeting. You're going to start getting some of the development out of the way. It'll feel like you're moving forward with that process. It's also going to help you to have to figure out how to explain your film. What is your film? What is it about? And you'll also get feedback from people that don't really have a reason to pretend like they like the project. And that's going to allow you to be able to improve it. You want to hear that criticism. You want to hear what it sounds like from people that aren't your friends and aren't your family who are like, yeah, because they want you to succeed. You want to hear it from people that don't know you and are like, well, this part doesn't make any sense, or, this part was really kind of slow. And you want to be able to hear those things so you can look at it and either choose not to or choose to adjust it and make it better. More minds on something is better than none. Just one, I mean. And also, you just have to figure out what your film is about. If you have a very artsy film and you don't really have a fluid story of like, what is the point of this film besides this one aspect that you thought of, then you're going to have to figure out how to explain it and how to come up with the idea. And that might help you to be like, well, I need to adjust something so that I can make it a little bit more interesting, or I can make it sound better, or it's not really about anything, is it? Let me go in and readjust this. So having that critical thinking is very important. And so just applying to grants is going to have you thinking about all these things. It's going to have you, start working on pre-production, like I said, like with the budget, with the scheduling, and figuring out like how long this is going to be, how much money are you going to need for it in the first place, and all of those things where you'll be further along than you were if you just never applied and are waiting for something to happen for your film to get made, because then it's just sitting there and you're probably not going to get some magic investor that's going to give you all the money for it. So that is what the grants do. They can help with that, and you're already going to be working on a lot of that anyway. So the only other aspects is that you have to apply for these grants and make sure you're doing the research to meet their qualifications. And after that, a lot of the stuff they require is stuff that you're already going to have to pitch to investors or show to your crew so that they know what this thing is going to be and they can help you make it. So if you're already going to do it anyway, you might as well try to get some grants along the way. Of course, the grants are going to take a lot of research, which is where the time-consuming part comes in. You have to do your research to find the grants. They're constantly, like I said, they're constantly shutting down, or they're starting up, or they're changing. And there's no one website that's going to display them all because of this factor, because ones that have been around a long time might just stop being around. Ones that have never existed might pop up out of nowhere. So you have to actually do research to figure out which ones are available this year, when their deadlines are, and make sure you have enough time and you meet their qualifications and you follow all their instructions and you know what company it's coming from. So it does a lot of stuff to do before you even can apply to it, but it will vastly help you have a better chance of getting those grants. They said one good way to find grants or people who give out grants, if you watch independent films, watch the credits and the special thanks, things like that. You're going to see a lot of these companies that helped them out. Special thanks to them for this, or special thanks to this film grant or this film fellowship or something like that, so that you can see like who's giving it out, how did they fund their film. A lot of the times it's going to be a lot of information in the credits. You might be able to see people's names. Independent films, they're not famous yet, so you might be able to see the producer and find their information and be able to contact them to get some idea of how maybe you want to do your project. Maybe that independent film is very like the one you're trying to make. And so you're like, hey, how did you find, investors and interest for your project? And then you can meet some people and make some connections with that. So watching the credits in independent films is actually it's like a treasure trove of information. If you are willing to put in the research and try to contact these people and try to look up these companies that help fund their projects. You'll also want a letter or multiple letters of recommendation from people you've worked with in film that know how you work, or maybe a boss or somebody if you've worked underneath somebody in a production, or if you've collaborated with people, just whoever you worked with in film that can recommend you and say why you would be deserving of that grant would be something you want to look into and try to get. And
Would
some
that be like-
require it, some grants require it, some don't. But I would say, again, all this stuff, just try to do it. I would do it with each one if I was applying for all these grants, because you never know what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Do you mean like a letter of recommendation?
Yeah, that's what I said, right?
No, yeah, it cut off. That's why I asked.
Oh, okay. You also might maybe want to consider shooting a proof of concept. If you're trying to make a feature film, some people will shoot a short film, send that into grants and get a grant that way, because, well, with all of the rest of the application, they send in, here's what we're going for. We made a 2-minute short film on the idea that we have, or the aesthetic we're going for, and whatever it is, like the feeling of it. And that will just give a better sense. So if you have the ability and the money for that, you can make like a proof of concept, depending on how big of a project you're trying to make, which would also help you in trying to get other avenues for funding if you're going for a feature. And yeah, I already explained the rest. The other ones is just like, there's different grants for feature length, short films, documentaries. Some grants are only applicable for different stages of production. And a bunch of these say feature length film, but they mean different time lengths. So don't just automatically disqualify yourself if you think, oh, my film's not 90 minutes. Well, they might not be talking about 90 minutes when they say feature. They might just mean more than 30 minutes or more than 50 minutes or something. So don't automatically disqualify yourself from anything. Check their requirements and just see if it's timed based like that. Like if it's short film, feature film, just see if you fall in their requirements, because not everyone says those words and they don't always mean the same thing. Does anyone have any questions or comments about film grants before I do the last little bit talking about film fellowships before we end it? All right. So film fellowships are different in that they may require a service commitment of some kind. These also may include a residency requirement and additional follow-up with the awarding committee. Like Vish was talking about with Priscilla, he was saying a film fellowship, they might offer you a grant, but you have to go to where they are. You usually have to relocate. That's a fellowship. The fellowship offers the money, but they also offer mentorship and the chance to like go meet professionals in the industry around your area or around whatever area that you are that they are in. You have to relocate to them, and then you stay on site with them and work with them and learn. And it's kind of like an internship where you're learning from the mentors, you're working in professional environments with professional equipment. And at the end, they'll give you some don't give you money, some give you gear. Some don't give you a grant at all. They kind of just, the whole thing is just experiencing and learning from the mentors and meeting people. So the fellowship might just be going to their site, being able to mess with their equipment and work with their stuff and work with their people. And other ones will offer you come here and do this for 3 months or 9 months or however long. And at the end, we'll give you this money for you to work on your project. So you have to like check and see what the different, what that fellowship entails and what they're going to offer. It's a great way for connecting and meeting other aspiring people. They usually don't have a fellowship for just one person. It's usually a group. So you can meet other people that are aspiring with it with you and learning that same, they're on the same level with you, but then also learning from the people who are already in the industry on professional sets. Some large companies do these. I know HBO has one where you can, if you get it, if you're lucky enough to get the fellowship, you get to go work on HBO, and it's like for upcoming television directors, and you get to kind of see how they do things and meet some of the people there and that work with them and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. It's just, it takes out a lot of time and it's a pretty big commitment to have to go to the location and be there for however long. They normally require you to live in house for the duration of the fellowship, and those can last for months up to a year or more. And they usually give a stipend for monthly costs, like for food and things like that, but not everyone's able to do this, obviously, because certain things and bills and expenses and things like that. Also, if you are planning to do a film, you would have to kind of put that on hold while you're in this fellowship, because you're not really able to do that while you're working with them and learning from them. They're kind of mentoring you in how to get the process going and how to find funding and whatever else, like all of the different aspects that go into it. So you're gonna have to put whatever your project is on hold while you go do it. It's still a good opportunity. Hey everyone, our internet went down. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was already done anyway. Like the last thing I was gonna say is fellowships have deadlines that need to be met and busy work to do. So if you're a type that likes to procrastinate, then these opportunities are not gonna really be for you, because they're very strict about their deadlines and things like that. But if you're trying to get on a professional set, it's going to be like that anyway. So
But did you mention that a lot of these are also like more for people that are in film school, or they're more education based? Most of them seem to be like connected to a school or.
Recording in progress.
Oh. Most of them seem to be.
Reverb.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Most of them seem to be connected to a school or an institution or something, it seems like. So for people that are in film school or studying or something like that. At least the ones that I saw.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I guess I'm host again. All right, sorry about that. Our internet went down and then it just made Rafael host. I was afraid we lost the whole recording, but it looks like it's still going. So maybe that'll mean once I press stop, we get the whole thing, hopefully. But we'll see. Yeah, but that was all I wanted to say. That was my last thing to say on fellowships. And then I was just going to say that
I'm gonna go back.
I'll be emailing everybody about the sound tool exercise probably tomorrow. And then we're just going to talk about editing tips, techniques, and advice, basic supplies that people don't really think about when talking about films, because there's just like everyday things and stuff, but a lot of it you need. And then we're talking about aspect ratio and editing, and that'll be the stuff for Thursday. So hopefully it won't be as long, but I know.
Yeah, hopefully, because these 3-hour days meetings, they're killing me. Although today I've been forcing myself to stay up till like at least 2 now, which will probably ruin my sleep schedule, but this
Does
going
anyone
better.
have anything to add or questions or comments about film fellowships, grants, any of that stuff?
Do you, Brian, did you hear of any of those when you were in school? I was gonna
I'm gonna
ask.
stop recording then.
Yeah,
Oh
we
no,
have,
like fellowships.
that was actually like a lot of the professors kind of urged that kind of stuff. And they would actually like send us like whenever a grant